Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Snarp Fangle podcast. I am your host, Jake Metzger, along with the best co-hosts around, who doesn't like to lollygag around with the devil or child predator robots, as a matter of fact. Ladies and gentlemen, David Reed.
What was that about the child predator robots?
Oh, because Pee-wee plays a robot in Flight of the Navigator.
Oh.
It was never proven. It's all, it's all apparent, Anyway.
Oh, you're talking about the indecent exposure case.
Yeah. That's
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for those, exactly. So that's
I don't he was never found guilty.
No, he never found guilty. It was all allegations, I think. Right?
Yep.
Something like that. So anyway, welcome back to episode 40 of the Snarp Fangle podcast. For all comments, concerns, thoughts, and fan art of Peter Cook if he was in Star Wars, to snarpfanglepod@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you very soon. So David, we're going to talk about two films today, and I'm very excited to talk about these two films, but we're in the in-between season right now of the year. We're like, what do we, December's next month. Do we do Christmas? What do we do in between time? And we kind of came up with this idea where we take two films that are both nostalgic to us, or one film. We each pick one film that's nostalgic to us, I should say. And we kind of pair them together and see what comes of it. But what was your idea for this? How do you feel about our picks today?
I would say that they're, good picks. We both each picked a movie that was nostalgic to us as a child, and in both cases we picked a movie that to our memories may not have been very, very good, but I'll save that for the end. As far as were these movies actually as bad as we thought they were going to be?
It's I think we should just start with our first one. What's our first one, David?
I guess our first one, if we're going in order, is Bedazzled.
Yes, Bedazzled. And it was directed by Harold Ramis of the Ghostbusters fame and many other films that he directed. Well, he didn't direct Ghostbusters, but he was starred in Ghostbusters.
Indeed.
So anyway,
he's famous because of Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and it's actually a remake of the 1967 classic. Have you heard of the other Bedazzled, David?
I've heard of it.
It's very, I don't know how to describe it. It seems very, I've only seen the trailer. It's got, again, Peter Cook wrote and starred in it, as well as Dudley Moore, the both co-stars. They both wrote it. And it was directed by Stanley Donen or whatever. It was a British UK comedy. And the trailer, you got to look up the trailer, ladies and gentlemen. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the remake from the year 2000, starring Brandon Frasier, Elizabeth Hurley, thank you, Elizabeth Hurley. And David, what are your general thoughts on Bedazzled? And of course, what's your history with this film, since it's your pick?
So this was a movie back in the early 2000s. Seemed to be on TV a lot. You know those movies that just seem to be on TV a lot, and this was one of them. And for whatever reason, it was just kind of like one of those, like, out of the available options, it became one of our sort of go-to picks as a family when we're, having a movie night, and it was like, okay, we're just going to look and see what movies are on TV, and we're going to watch that as a family. Bedazzled was kind of, one of our go-tos. One of the other ones being The Mummy, also a Brendan Fraser movie.
Yeah, that's a classic.
But after, graduating from high school and reaching adulthood and living life, I kind of left this movie behind, and it existed only in my memories for many a year. So I was kind of excited to revisit it. And if I remember correctly, I think this whole pairing was based on my initial desire to revisit Bedazzled anyway.
Yeah, I remember you were saying, where you were like, what do we do in November? And then you're like, what about, been wanting to watch Bedazzled. What can we, use it, pair it with? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then we came to the conclusion of nostalgic films. And so I picked Flight of the Navigator, and you picked Bedazzled. What a pairing. Let me just say.
Indeed.
Crazy, crazy pairing. 14 years apart. Well, isn't it crazy? The year 2000 and then 1986, 14 years in between. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But it's even more crazy to think that this was 24 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't have any history with this film at all. Like, I remember seeing the poster, like, maybe on TV, like, when you're, like, on DirecTV, you would navigate and you'd see the poster and you would hover over the title or whatever. Or you would change channels and you see Brendan Fraser and you see the icon of Bedazzled or whatever, the name. You're like, what is this? This is weird. The devil? What does that mean? But honestly, I just remember the poster, in all honesty, but nothing else of this. And then I watched it for the first time the other night when you and me watched it. And it was very enjoyable. Very enjoyable. But I want to get to your opinion on this film. It was nostalgic, but what did you take away viewing it as this time around, I should say?
I took away that. Yeah, so my take on this movie was that it wasn't it didn't turn out to be as awful of a movie as I kind of was expecting it to be, because like I said, I was just going off of memory from years and years and years ago and my impressions of it as a young teenager. And basically I knew that at that time my inner film critic had not yet fully developed, given that there were a whole host of movies that I remember enjoying as a kid that watching as adults are like, this is kind of awful. The big one for me being Phantom Menace. My God, that film is terrible. But as a kid, I loved it because I was a hardcore Star Wars fan. And this was when the only thing that existed was the original trilogy. There was no other movies. And so when Phantom Menace came around, I was like, yeah, more Star Wars. And that's all I cared about, literally. But then watching it as an adult, I'm like, this movie's not good.
It's definitely not great, that's for sure.
But yeah, so with that sort of background in mind, I was thinking about Bedazzled, and I was like, oh man, I watched that so many times growing up, and I seemed to enjoy it a lot. And I was like, I kind of want to revisit it. And I'm guessing from my few memories of it that it'll probably turn out to be much like the Phantom Menace, a movie that was much better through nostalgia colored glasses than it is viewing it as a critically thinking adult.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? When we sat down and watched this, I'm like, I don't really know what to expect from this movie. The concept of this film, if you weren't aware, audience, is there's this down on his luck fella who tries to be social, but is a social outcast. He's a geeky fella, and he's down on his luck. And then the devil pops up and offers him 7 wishes to fulfill his wildest dreams. And we go through the whole film and figure out and see what exactly he wishes for and the fallacies in all of his desires.
Yeah. One thing, too, with the setup of the movie is he's, more than anything else, he's kind of a weirdo and kind of a loser. Like, not a loser in the sense that, like, he's being necessarily treated unjustly, but kind of a loser in the sense that he's just kind of weird and needy.
Yeah.
And socially awkward. And so the fruit of his interactions with people is that nobody really wants to be around him.
Yeah.
Or if they are, they just want to make fun of him because he does so many weird and awkward things. But more than anything is he wants the love of a woman.
He wants the love of a specific woman.
Very specific woman. Yeah. A very specific woman who doesn't even know that he exists. And so, yeah, when he finally comes around to the idea of having 7 wishes, he basically, spoiler alert, all of them are geared towards making him desirable to this one particular woman in one way or another.
Yeah. And I feel like they kind of really made the awkward humor extremely awkward, but also very relatable in some ways, even to the extreme extent that we see it in this film. But I liked the style of this film, and kind of how it presented itself. It's very juvenile in the sense, but it's also kind of mature as we get to the ending. And Brendan Fraser's character, who, by the way, Brendan Fraser is fantastic in this, and his back and forth with Elizabeth Hurley as the devil is really like, you could tell like they had really good chemistry, and that, at least from what I could tell, I could be wrong. I've only seen it once, but it was very enjoyable in that sense to see their back and forth. But also, the acting from Brendan Fraser and all the crazy scenarios is really like captivating, and he does a really good job.
Yeah,
as well as the devil, who actually in the original, the devil was played by a man, and then there was a character named Lust, who was supposed to be the hot chick that followed the guy around. But in this remake, they kind of combined it into just the devil and Elizabeth Hurley, who's, very seductive and everything. So it's like, it's kind of a interesting remake. I'm really intrigued to see the original, just to see how they handled it. It looks like a fun, like, rompy British comedy. The trailer was like, it's the funniest thing that has come out of the UK in years or something. And there's something like that in the 1967 when it came out. But this remake, man, I think I also like the style of I don't know. What do you think of the Brendan Fraser and Elizabeth Hurley and that whole dynamic?
Yeah. I will say that the acting and the characterization and of both Brendan Fraser's character and Elizabeth Hurley's character, very over the top, very goofy.
Very.
But it's done in a way that's very entertaining. It kind of draws you in. And you're like, these people are like clearly not real people.
Yes.
Like they're highly exaggerated, goofy, over the top characters. But at the same time, it just, it's almost like a train wreck. You just can't help but just like stare at it.
I would also argue that pretty much every character in this film is exaggerated to a certain extent, especially all the coworkers that he has that make fun of him, and their reappearances in like his wishes that he has,
Oh yeah,
like the recurring roles of all these coworkers, as when he's a drug lord, when he's a basketball star, when he's Lincoln. Like, not to spoil all of it, but there's so much that happens in this movie, and it's very enjoyable too. The scenarios that I just mentioned are, I don't know how to describe it. I'm like, it's kind of like an anthology series in the film. But it's fun because you're like, oh, he has 4 wishes left. What are the other 4 scenarios going to be? And it just goes into complete wackiness and crazy directions. But
yeah, it's almost kind of like the way each wish is portrayed. It's almost like an SNL skit.
Yeah,
because it's the same people in every time, but playing different roles.
Yeah. And I didn't do any research on who these people are, but you have Harold Ramis, who also did the screenplay, as well as Larry Gelbart, and then Peter Talon. So I'm intrigued to see what their work is. Maybe they were SNL writers. I don't know. But you're correct. Like, I mean, as a kid, what did you think of all this crazy scenarios? And then as an adult, you're going into it. Were they just as enjoyable? Were they more enjoyable? Was there things you didn't catch as a kid?
No, I don't think. I mean, there's not much like depth to this movie in terms of things that, you might miss that could be recaptured on subsequent viewings. But I think my impressions of it now versus what I remember my impressions of it being are pretty much the same. I think this movie is not as bad as I was expecting it to be, and the only thing that it is goofy and over the top. It's not poorly done. It's not poorly acted. It's
not desperate to grab your attention. It's just trying to be its own thing, strangely.
Yeah.
So I was looking up the writers. Larry Gelbart did the screenplay for Tootsie, is what stands out to me, as well as a bunch of other just random stuff and Bedazzled on top of that. But Peter Talon's a concurrent, a repeat collaborator with Harold Ramis. He did Analyze This and Analyze That, the two films with Robert De Niro and Billy Crystal, which seemed pretty interesting. I'd never seen them. But he also did the screenplay for Just Like Heaven, which I was like, wait, what? Just Like Heaven? I love that movie. It's a good movie. So anyway, man, where was I gonna go with this? What else do I have here? The scenarios. I want to say the editing. I want to point out the editing really quick. There was some really interesting like things just analyzing it and from an editor's perspective, but also it's incredibly well paced and well, not incredibly well paced, I guess, but it keeps it going really well and keeps your attention on it. But also it's unnoticeable, which is a really good thing. Like you don't notice the editing because usually when you notice it, it's pretty bad. But unnoticeable editing around the board, pretty great in terms of that technical sense. And I don't know anything else that like I haven't seen anything else that Harold Ramis has done, but I'm kind of intrigued to see what else he's done. Kind of like to Analyze This movie that I mentioned earlier. But,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I mean, have you seen anything else of his work, or I just know him from Ghostbusters. That's about it.
Yeah, the same here. I saw Analyze This a long time ago. Don't remember it at all.
Okay.
Zero recollection of what it was like at all. And so basically, yeah, the only thing I have to go off of him as a creative is Ghostbusters in this movie.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think this is a very enjoyable film. I think we're gonna dive into some of the plot here and momentarily, but what else has been your perspective of this film as an adult? And what do you think of that Sister Hazel song we get in the ending, you know?
Oh yeah. Generic 90s song of the
Oh, just get the latest song from the latest Sister Hazel's album.
Yeah.
Release, basically.
I thought it was Counting Crows, to be honest.
Yeah, it comes off like that too.
Sister Hazel is one of those bands that's like just if they ever were on my radar, they got off of it pretty quick and I forgot about them. Yeah, there. But yeah, so I actually was like, is this a Counting Crows song? And we Shazammed it, and no, it was not.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know about you, David, but you're ready to get into some of the plot?
Yeah.
All right. Let's just walk through this. I remember the film opening with a very weird fast-forwarding montage, and then it pauses the people on the screen. It says, this guy's praying, and this guy's praying. And then it shows another priest on the ground praying, but it says sleeping. And just all these little, like, little bits going through it, like tips 50%, tips 5%, like all these just random, like I think part of the plot, I was reading it earlier, is about the devil using a computer to analyze who's like weak and vulnerable. And that's how the devil meets Brendan Fraser. And in this, the whole opening montage is kind of like that, basically. Also, Bill Pope did the cinematography, David. You know who Bill Pope is?
I do not.
He did the cinematography for the Spider-Man Raimi films.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, but we get Brandon Fraser in this office, and he's just I don't know how to describe his character, David. You just said it well earlier, but he's like, socially awkward. But there's a word we used for him. He's exaggerated, yes, but what else is there? There's like he's just on another level. He's like a unicorn in this very desolate wasteland.
He's like
of normalcy.
Yeah, he's basically the best way to describe him, he's like a desperate loser.
Desperate loser, yes.
And he's not a loser in the sense that you necessarily root for the guy, because he kind of like creates his own problems because he's just so weird.
He's so weird and so awkward, and we see him trying to make in the beginning of the movie friends with like every one of his coworkers, and it's really awkward and just like this was also, by the way, after The Mummy, and you're like, you see him in this like crazy like action like and comedy like role to a strictly comedic role, and he's really good. And I think he has his I think he kind of not outdoes himself, but you can tell like early on this guy was very well. Was a very good actor, I would say.
Yeah, Brandon Fraser was kind of like pretty much, I would say, the standout actor of the early 2000s. And the like, you had The Mummy, you had this movie, you had Blast from the Past.
Yeah, Blast from the Past,
among others,
Yeah.
where he just played all of these different characters that were kind of off the wall in different unique ways, but he managed to make them work.
Have you ever seen Blast from the Past, David?
Blast from the Past? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Many, many times.
Yeah, that's the one my parents would always throw on, and I would always be like weirded out by it as a kid. I'm like, this is kind of weird. This sounds kind of awkward. I don't want to be here. But like, I remember watching a little bit as an adult. I'm like, man, this is great. Like, this is fantastic. But yeah, it also, I think that came out in 2000 as well. Like, he had, I think that in 2000 or 99, and then, or no, I could be totally wrong. Man, don't listen to me. But anyway, Blast from the Past was another one. But yeah, we have Brendan Fraser, socially awkward. He's trying really, really hard to make friends, but he doesn't know how, which just ensues in hilarity. He goes to this bar and meets up with his coworkers who don't want anything to do with him, and they're like literally hiding from him, which is hilarious. And then he goes to talk to the girl he's met just once in the 4 years he's worked at the San Francisco tech company. And he gets, she walks away. He is contemplating what to do. And then he, like, I think it's what's it called? Pool ball falls down the stairs from the bar on another level because somebody's playing pool up there, and it hits his feet, and he grabs it and he looks at it. He's like, huh? And then he sees this smoking hot red dressed chick up there, like saying, hey, come over here, And he's like, duh, what? And then and he goes up, gives her the ball. She's like talking to him, seducing him. And there's a ton of innuendos, countless of them in this movie, by the way. Like, and that's one thing I want to talk about really quick, are the innuendos. It's just, as an adult, you're like, oh, wow, this is like ridiculous. But as a kid, I would imagine it's really hard not to get some of these, honestly. Like, if you were a teenager, you'd probably get pretty much every one of them, which probably comes from the juvenile nature of this film. But
yeah,
it's like,
I mean, it's well done enough to where it's kind of exists in that sweet spot where smaller children will be blissfully unaware of what's going on, and then as the little older kids will get what's going on, and then the adults, it's just like you get just the full display of just
glory that real Harold Ramis has. But anyway, so the devil's trying to seduce him. She makes out with him. And then she's like, no, I'm the devil. He's like, okay, lady, just chill out. Like, come on, you're not really the devil. And then basically she goes on and convinces him she is. He believes it. And he's like, all right, I wish for she's like, I'm going to give you wishes. And he's like, okay, fine. I wish for a Big Mac and fries or something, or a Coke.
Yeah,
and
it was a Big Mac and a Coke.
Yeah, Big Mac and a Coke. And then she's like, wish granted. And then she takes him on the bus, public transport, and goes to a McDonald's and buys him that.
Well, she orders
it, but he pays for it.
Yep. Because she, quote, lost her purse in the underworld.
So, and it's just, and I love just the whole sequence of them. Like, it just cuts to them on the bus, and I love it. It's so great.
Yeah, which is really funny too. What was I gonna say? Something about
like the bus, the transport, her taking him after that to the lair.
Their initial meetup.
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of proves that, like, despite his weirdo loser nature, he seems to have like a shred of dignity in him, because he is not immediately taken in by this seductive woman who's like following him around, and claims to be the devil. He's like, okay, you're too crazy, even for me.
Yeah, even for me. Yeah, and so like, he tries to brush her off. She like reappears in some places randomly in a different outfit with like a wine glass and stuff like that. And then they go to McDonald's, and then they go to the lair, David. And the lair is like, basically, how I would describe it is some random broken down, on the cusp of being broken down club on the bottom of like some bridge in probably the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco.
Well, it's in Oakland.
Oh, it's in Oakland. Sorry.
Specifically.
So they go to her lair, and it's like it's a club, it's a party. It's everybody's like, oh, it's Brandon Frasier, and that's not really his name. I can't remember his name, but it's like, oh, it's you, and they all know him, and it's like, what the hell? Oh, Elliot, that was his name.
Yes, Elliot.
Like, oh, it's Elliot. And then he's like, wait, what? Okay. And so he's like put off by all these random people. Like, he's like, oh, this is weird. And then he's off over all kinds of like sinful things, but he also takes a cookie from a plate. He's like, I'm going to take a plate of cookie. And then the devil leads him into her like office area. And then the deal starts happening, basically. But David, what happens next in this scene from your memory?
Well, basically, he doesn't quite believe her at this point, but she, pulls off some. She does a little bit of a transformation, and
like she turns into a guy dressed as paint who's the devil. It's like, is this what you want me to look like?
Yeah, basically.
And Frasier's like, oh!
Yeah, and finally, she seems to wear him down, and he's like, okay, I'll give this a try, because he's desperate for love.
Desperate for love, yeah.
And he's he's like, okay, this could be my shot. And so he he signs the contract, which is like a stack of papers like 6 inches thick.
No, yeah, it's like huge. It's like a book. And he's like, what is this? And David, we have to talk about the television screens with the flashback of the chick he likes.
Oh, yes.
It's like all these screens, and it shows like footage of his, like the love of his life, the lady he wants to like go on a date with, is like running toward him on the beach in this dress. And she's like, Elliot. And then she runs into this man who has really long hair, and he flicks it around, and it's Elliot. And it's basically Elliot in a George in the Jungle garb with the chick. And he's like, sign it, Elliot, sign it.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what I forgot about that.
Yeah, he goes and he's like, sign.
That's what finally convinces him, is he sees that little thing on the TV screen appear of like what his life could be like. And he's finally convinced to go after it.
Yeah, and so he immediately walks over, signs the document. The devil's all happy, and she then hands him this red little like pager to him, and she's like, if anything goes wrong, just press 666 and it'll take you, I can't remember what she describes it as, but like it'll take you out of whatever you're in or something like that.
Yeah.
It'll make your wish reverse, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, basically it's like a reset.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And he is, of course, immediately suspicious. He's like, wait, in case something goes wrong. And she's like, it's just a formality, Yeah. It's just something I need to do to, cover myself, kind of a thing.
Yeah. And so like he wishes for, I think, money, power, and being married to Allison.
Yes.
And so then we cut to the first wish.
Yeah.
And what's the first wish, David?
So yeah, he wishes to become extremely rich, extremely powerful, and married to the girl he's in love with. And boom, there's a cut, and he wakes up in bed in this like gorgeous looking like mansion bedroom, and lo and behold, who's sleeping next to him but the love of his life. And he's like, whoa. And
he's like, yes.
And he goes down the stairs, and he kind of like takes a gander at this giant palace of a home that he finds himself in. And then all of a sudden,
and he has a mustache.
Oh yeah, he has a mustache
and a big honking nose.
And all of a sudden, somebody comes up to him and says, hey, we need we need to see you over here because of whatever. And but the kicker is he's speaking in Spanish.
Yeah.
And Brandon Frasier, of course, goes to say, I don't speak Spanish, but then he says it in Spanish. And we come to find out that, well, he's been turned into a Colombian drug lord.
And then, like, he's like really put off that he's speaking Spanish, and he's like, "Oh, I cannot believe this!" And then, like, he's like, "Hi, my name is Elliot," and he's like, "Oh man, this is great." And the guy, it's his like butler or something with the breakfast, I think.
Yeah,
he's like, "Oh, he's like, what is going on here? Like, I've known you all this whole time, And he's like, "Oh yeah, you need to go talk to your guys, And so he goes and talks to his guys. But that whole scene with the butler is just freaking hilarious. And before we watched this movie, David, I was on Twitter and randomly that clip was going around of him with the butler. And I'm like, what the heck is this from? Like, I didn't know what movie it was from. I didn't know what context it was in. It was just that clip. And I'm like, oh, this is hilarious. And it was only like, I think 10 seconds of it. But it was so funny how I saw that. And then we decided to watch Bedazzled. Or like, we decided to watch Bedazzled, and then as we came up to the day we were going to watch it, I saw that clip randomly. So maybe it's my phone listening to me. I don't know. So
it's the algorithm.
It's the algorithm. So anyway, he goes and meets some dudes that work for him. He's like, yes, I'm rich and powerful, and I have a huge nose, and it's delicious. I'm drinking wine from a horse saddle. And he's like, yes, my wife is over there, and she's hanging out with her tutor. He teaches her English, And then it's very obvious that she's having an affair with the tutor. He cuts his mustache or something, has a bandage on there. And he like, how are your English lessons going? And he's like, after 6 months of English, what do you say? And I don't remember what she says, but it's like, it's really bad English. Like, I'm going to the store and like Gumby or something. Like, it's so dumb.
Yeah.
But like, he goes back to his bros. He's like mad at his wife. He's like, how could you do this to me? This is ridiculous. And they're all in Spanish in the subtitles. And it's like fantastic. And so she like threatens him. She says he's like one of the worst people ever. And she basically like kicks him out of his own room. He goes and with his boys and there's a whole bunch of military folks around. He hops into one of the cars. He's like, what's going on? He hops into one of the vehicles and they go and meet basically the drug manufacturing facility in the jungle. And he's like, oh no, I'm a Colombian drug lord.
Yeah.
And then there's some guys who are going to buy some product, buy the cocaine.
Yeah.
And they're in Russian.
Yeah, some Russians.
And what happens? What happens next, David?
So he's speaking to them, and then immediately, without thinking about it, he starts speaking to them in Russian, and then he stops himself. He's like, oh, great, I speak Russian, too.
And he says it in, like, perfect Russian. Oh, man. So basically what happens is there's a deal that's happening. Everything goes wrong. They're like, oh, this guy can't be trusted. And they'll have, some of his guys have cocaine. He says, you suck in Spanish at them. And basically they start shooting up the place and he yells at the Russians in Spanish, your mother wears combat boots.
Yeah.
And so basically what happens is a bunch of action, shooting galore. The place explodes. He gets out of there. He grabs onto the helicopter as the Russians are escaping. And then he falls from the helicopter and just per chance grabs his pager. And then it slips out of his hand and he has to dive through the air to grab it. And then he grabs it and presses 666 and resets the wish. Oh, wow. What a crazy scene. So anyway, he falls on top of a car. He then meets the devil again. And she's dressed as a cop and she's giving everybody tickets. And she's purposefully making all the meters expire. It's hilarious. So let's see. Okay, so where do we go from here? He's talking to her. He's like, well, I want to see what's happening to the lady I like when she's a teenager or whatever, or not teenager, but I don't remember.
No,
Did they go back in time or something?
No. They, at first he's mad, which is like the case after every wish goes wrong. And, she does the little pouty lips and the puppy dog eyes and somehow manages to get back in his good graces. And, but this time she basically tells him, it's like, you know what? Women aren't really into, money and power all that much anyway. So she takes him to her room so he can read her diary. And they're like incorporeal. So like she happens to be showering and then she walks out of the bathroom and he's like, "Oh my God." But she just walks right through him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he reads her diary. Well, she reads.
The devil reads.
The devil reads her diary out loud to Elliot. And basically, we come to find out that Allison just wants, to find a real sensitive, nice guy who's in touch with his emotions. Oh, God. And so, the light bulb goes off in Elliot's head, and he's like, "All right, I want to be the most sensitive, most in touch with my emotions man on the planet."
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. So we get a wish then. And he wishes, I want to be, what does he wish? Like, I want to be the most sensitive man.
Yeah, the most sensitive man, the most...
in touch with my feelings.
In touch with my emotions. And he's kind of learned his lesson too. He doesn't want to just be married to Allison. He's like, I want Allison to love me.
Yes.
So he thinks he's learned his lesson.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's careful to, instead of wish to be married to her, he wishes that she's in love with him. And bing, boom, boom. It cuts away, and all of a sudden, Allison and Elliot are on a beach together, watching a beautiful sunset. And oh my God, Brendan Fraser is a redhead with the most freckles I've seen on any human being.
Oh God, and what an incredibly awkward scene it is. Every time he like looks away from her as he's talking to her and looks at the sunset, he's like, oh, he just starts crying. And then like he plays a song for her, he made dinner for her. It's like
he draws her portrait.
And then like as he's showing her the portrait, like a bunch of basically dude bros from the beach just try to kick sand in his face, and he's like, no, this is not the way it's supposed to go. And he's like, he can't defend himself. He can't do anything like that. And he has sand in his hair, sand everywhere because the army dudes or whatever are kicking in his face. And then they convince Allison, or the girl, to go with them. And she like gives up on him and leaves him. She's like, "You are the most sensitive person ever. I can't stand you." And then walks away with the guys, basically. And so as Brendan Fraser's like crying, he like grabs the pager and he presses 666 and gets out of that wish.
Yeah, what was really funny though is as he's pressing the buttons to dial 666, he looks over at the sunset one last time and just breaks down into tears even more.
Oh man. So he's teleported back to some random public area in a pond or in a fountain.
Yeah.
Sees the devil there, and she pulls him out, and she kind of gives him this like pep talk and stuff, sort of. And he's like, "I'm done with this. This is crazy." And he's like, "Oh," and she starts like getting emotional, trying to like trick him or whatever. But she's like, "Everybody just says that." And he's like, "Why?" She's like, "'Cause I'm the devil," or something like that. And
yeah, basically she turns it around on him. She's like, "I'm just trying to do the best that I can. And nobody likes me because I'm the devil. And I'm not perfect,
Oh, man. And it's just a great scene. And so before we get into the next sequence, David, I'm trying to remember what he wishes for. But I think they're talking about him being tough or something as a complete opposite of the most sensitive person. Or something like that.
Yeah.
Because next is the basketball scene.
Basically, at this point, so after once again, she does her pouty lips and puppy dog eyes and gets back in his good graces. She tells him, "You know what? Women just don't know what they want. So maybe you should, instead, maybe you should wish for something that you want." And so he's like, "You know what? I've always wanted to I've always loved basketball. I've always wanted to play professional basketball." So he wishes to be, tall and strong and amazingly talented pro basketball player.
That's all he says, too. So then we cut immediately after the wish is granted to Elliot, who's now like 8 feet high, totally bleached blonde hair, who's got piercings on his face. And he's running to the basket, followed by all these other basketball players. And he jumps from like half of the court on. And it's like, oh, and like junks on the basketball in the basket. And it's just the most ridiculous scene ever. You see the devil with the cheerleaders cheering him on. Everybody in the crowd's like, yeah, Elliot the Almighty. And you have the commentators like, oh, Elliot Richards is having an amazing season this year, as he always does, Garrett. And and then like it shows all the points, steals, and rebounds, and it's just all his face. It's just every category is like him.
Yeah. And at the end of the game, he like closes the game out by making a shot from the other side of the court while looking away from the basket.
Yeah. And like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. And he's like dancing for the camera. He's like, and then he goes to, and then after the game, he gets interviewed. And like, I don't remember the details of it, but all I remember here, he is just sweat is pouring
basically
down.
what happens is, a reporter, Allison as a reporter.
Oh, no, this is before the locker room.
No, she comes up to him.
Oh, okay.
Yes, she's the one who comes up to him. And she's like, a huge fan of his, and she's interviewing him after the game. And, he's like literally pouring sweat to a ridiculous degree off his face.
No, that's before. It's before in the ring. Like it's after the game. One of his like coworkers comes is interviewing him. Who's like interviewing him, and he's just pouring sweat onto the guy as he's talking. He's like, this is a good job.
There was two sequences.
Two sequences, yeah.
There was two sequences. So yeah, first, he's interviewed by just some random sportscaster, and he's pouring sweat, and he's like, gotta give 110%,
and the team's a team, and we do a great job, and and it's just he's pouring sweat down from his head, and it's pouring onto the guy.
And he can't articulate himself in any way other than just to say, give 110%. There's no I in team and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then we go to the locker room scene.
Yeah, then Allison, when he's done interviewing the guy, Allison as a reporter comes up to him and, wants to interview him. And she's obviously a huge fan of his. And then she's follows him into the locker room. And, he again does his, pouring sweat and... Oh, never mind. He's showered at this point.
Yeah, he's showered at this point, yeah.
Yeah, so he's wearing just a towel.
Just a towel?
And he's so tall, like the towel looks like those like Roman gladiator skirt things that go down to the
togas
just to the knee.
Yeah,
from the waist to the knee. Like a full size towel just goes down from his waist to his knees, basically, because he's so huge. And so she's interviewing him, and things are getting a little hot and heavy. And he, finally thinks he's about to get somewhere with this chick, and he decides to. Well, she brings it up.
Yeah, she brings it up
that he must be, graciously endowed. Yeah. Must be packing the big guns, essentially.
Yeah.
And he's like,
yeah.
And then, he decides to show it to her.
Yep.
And he takes off the towel, and we don't see anything.
Yeah.
But we see
the reactions.
Both of their reactions, and from their reactions, we can tell that it's quite the opposite of being impressive.
Yeah. And so he's like crying. He's like, no, go. And she leaves.
Yeah,
and
she
then...
laughs. She laughs, and she's like makes up an excuse. It's like, oh, I gotta be somewhere else, and then just walks away.
And he's like just heartbroken, and he wants the dream to end or the wish to end. So he turns around, David, and I love this part so much. He goes to find the pager in his locker.
Yeah, and he's got 666 on sticky notes all over the place.
And then he finally finds the pager. He's like, yeah, and he presses it, and he presses 555. And then he's like, nah. And then he presses 777, and it still doesn't work. He's like, oh. And he's like, oh, God, yeah. He grabs a Post-it note that says 666. He grabs it, holds it upside down, and puts 999 in there. So he's not the smartest cookie in the basketball team. And then he figures out it's 666, and then teleports back. So after this, Brandon Frasier, Elliot Richards, transports himself to a hospital where the devil is like this nurse, and she's giving candy to all the pill boxes for all the patients or whatever. And he basically tells her, I want to be one of the smartest men around, a fun guy at a party. Like, I want to be a good socialite, you know, as well as like being well endowed, like basically. And so he tells this to her, and she's like, oh yeah, wish granted. And then we get transported to him in an elevator coming out, and he's in a suit and tie, very well dressed, Brandon Frasier style. And then he's just friends with everybody at this party, basically. But so he goes through this party, and I think it's his mom that comes up to him, introduces him to a couple folks or whatever. His coworkers are there as other folks as well. And then we finally see Allison there. Oh, it's the chick. And everybody loves him. He's like, everybody loves Elliot Richards, the famed author.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And do you remember what he writes about or whatever? As the author? Like,
it's not really like, it's not really described. Basically, he's just
like something super esoteric.
Well, he's basically presented. It's like the topic of the book is a complete joke.
Yeah,
it's just like some really complicated topic that he explains in the most complicated way possible. Just to touch on, just to say what the book's about. Mm-hmm. And so but the idea is that he's like, you know, he's what you would call a polymath, I guess, where he is like,
that sounds right.
He's just he is knowledgeable about a lot of topics, and he's extremely skilled at a lot of things. And because he's so good at what he does, because he's so knowledgeable about all these various things, it's brought him a lot of fame and fortune. And everybody loves to talk to him because he's,
he's so likable.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so he sees Allison. They talk for a while, go on the balcony and talk for a while. He basically wins her over. And he's like, let's go back to my place. And so they go back to his place. And they're talking. They're hanging out. She jumps in his arms. She's like, I love you, basically. And then he's like, huh. And it's all a little bit too unbelievable. His life is perfect. He has all this money, all this fame. Everybody loves him and likes him. He then has the woman of his dreams in his arms, David, as they're walking through the apartment. And then as they're entering the bedroom, what happens, David?
Well, we hear a voice from off screen in a very stereotypically effeminate sort of way, basically screech at him saying, well, there you are. Where have you been all this time? And it pans around, and there's an obviously gay dude sitting on the bed looking with great disapproval and annoyance at this girl that he's brought home.
And like the acting from his husband basically is hilarious and just way over the top. But then he's like, I'm not gay. And then the husband tells him, okay, then what's the story behind the Wicked musical or something like that? Or no, Rent. It's Rent.
Yeah, he asked him all these questions about Broadway musicals, and he knows them all. And you start to hear a little bit of that sort of effeminate, like gay lisp in his voice come through just a little bit.
So bad.
But even though he's like, but that doesn't convince him.
No,
he's like, no, there's no way I'm gay. So he's like, he turns to Allison. He's like, I'm going to convince you that I'm not gay, basically.
Yeah.
And he's just like, kiss me. And she's like, okay. And they passionately make out, and then he just kind of like cuts it short and pulls away from me. He's like, "Yep, I'm gay."
So like after this, he reaches for the pager, starts putting it in. Or no, he's talking with his husband for just a second. And he's like, "All right, I'm gonna end this. I'm gonna get to the pager." And so he does end up doing that. But the funniest thing about that to me is he starts naming all these really accurate things about Rent in the musical and the history, and some of it, I don't know all of it, but I know some of it, and so I recognize some of it. And then he then ends it, cuts short, and like after like, well, you know what? This year, and this guy wrote it in this background, and then he's like, "Oh my god, I am gay." He's like, "But wait, I don't believe it," and then he kisses her. But yeah, it's so funny. So then he assumedly cuts back, assumedly presses the button, and resets everything. We then cut to a classroom. The devil is teaching this high school class. She has a pile of apples on the desk, and she's teaching some random lesson. She gives no homework for the day and the week and tells them to go have fun and don't do anything important. And Brandon Frasier's in the back of the classroom after they all leave. And she goes up to him, and they talk about what to do from here, basically. So I think they have a discussion that leads eventually. Like, tell me, like it. So I can't remember exactly what they say, but I know. So how
basically, they're talking, and they sort of come to the conclusion that he's been thinking about himself too much. He needs to do something really noble for humanity, but we can kind of tell that he's like not at that point where he actually wants to do anything selfless. He still wants, fame and recognition, but he's convinced himself that this time he's done wishing for all these selfish things like money and good looks and all that. Wants to do something good for humanity. He wants to do something noble, something important. And so he wishes that he were the president of the United States. And we cut to the the theater in the 1800s.
Oh, no.
And lo and behold, he's Abraham Lincoln.
He's Abraham Lincoln. And so, yes, he's Abraham Lincoln. We are at the theater, the famous theater where Abraham Lincoln
it was a Ford Theater.
Ford Theater.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "Oh my God, what's happening, huh?" And then he realizes who he is. He realizes, and they're like, "It's just after the war." And he's like, "Oh my God." He's like, "I'm Abraham Lincoln." And they're like, "Yes, we know. You're amazing." And Allison's his wife. And he's like, "Oh no." And so they go up to the booth in the film or the theater.
Well, I don't think Allison is his wife.
Yeah.
But
she's just there, I guess.
She's there, and she, once again, is like the basketball Wish. She's an adoring fan of his and wants to go up and sit with him on the balcony as they, watch this play. And, he's freaking out because he knows enough about history to know what's coming next.
Yeah, so like they go up to the booth. She sits down next to him, and he's like frantically looking for the pager. He can't find it, and so he's looking everywhere in all of his pockets, everything. He's like, "God, there's so many pockets." And then finally he finds it. And as he finds it, John Wilkes Booth bursts out from behind and holds the gun to his head, and he's like, "Wait!" And then he stops, and he presses 666 on it, and he's like, "Okay, go ahead." Oh, so that was one of the other wishes. And then right after that, he gets back. It cuts to him in the office. He's walking in at work, and he's just down on his luck. He's so sad, but something's different about him. His attitude is different. His posture is different. He doesn't have his glasses on. He has a really nice Levi jacket on, No longer dressing up like a geek, but dressing up like a loser instead, Not a loser geek. So anyway, he has an argument with one of his coworkers, or I guess his boss, and he's like, "You haven't been in for like a week. You're almost fired." And he's like, "Oh yeah." And then he's like, "It's not going to happen again." And I think he threatens the guy or stands up for himself in a way.
Yeah.
And then he hops on his computer, and the devil pops on the screen in like a call girl fashion or something like that, I guess. So And then she starts telling him, hey, what's going on? Like what happened to the last wish, And so he's like, no, I'm done with you. Like, screw you, get out of here.
Well, before this, he mentions that he has, because so far we got Colombian drug lord.
Yeah.
We got sensitive guy.
And then the
basketball player.
Mm-hmm.
We got intelligent rich dude. We got president of the United States.
Yes.
So he's thinking he has two wishes left.
Yeah.
And he mentions that, and Elizabeth Hurley is like, no, you only have one wish left. Remember the Big Mac and the Coke? And he's like, justifiably pissed off about it.
Yeah.
He's like, but we rode on the bus to get there, and I had to pay for it. And she's like, just being pedantic about it. She's like, but yeah, well, you wished for it and I got it for you, right? And so at that point, he's pretty much done with her. And she starts to get angry because, the wishes are part of the contract. And, well, he didn't read what happens. What happens if he doesn't... if he doesn't make his wishes.
Mm-hmm. So he has one wish left. She's convinced him to do the last one. And contractually, he's obligated to do it. And so then he goes to look for help. So he goes to a church. He goes to a Catholic church. He talks to the father there. And he's like, what's the matter, my son? And he's like, Father, I don't think I should be here. Oh, you're welcome, dear. Of course you are. And then he says something like, anything, I won't. He's like, I don't think you'll understand, Father. And he's like, trust me, try me. Whatever you say, I'm sure I'll understand. And so basically he says exactly what you did, what you just said about the Big Mac and the Coke, how there's only 6 wishes and there were 6 wishes done instead of 5. And then he ends and he looks at the father, and the father gives a really uncomfortable look. And then it cuts to him being let out by the police. And so after this, he's arrested. He goes to the station. He's like, I know my rights. I need a lawyer. We're going to book you. And then who shows up at the desk but the devil dressed as a cop again. So she grabs him, leads him to a cell, and she like threatens him. And she's like, you've learned a valuable lesson. You're doomed. I really like you, Elliot. I really do. But the road ends here. Then she throws him in the cell. So basically after that, I don't remember the conversation he has with this fellow cellmate. They both have amazing the amazing, fantastic Levi jackets. I just need to point that out, David, because like I'm jealous. Like I need to find myself a nice Levi jacket like that. But anyway.
Yeah, so he's in the jail cell, and he happens to discover that he's not alone, and there's a man in there with him, and this man is smoking a cigarette and just kind of minding his own business.
Got some cornrows and just chilling.
Yep. And then they just kind of like Elliot doesn't really want to talk to him, but he just kind of like, he just kind of strikes up a conversation, and Elliot's like, sure, whatever. And he, mentions that he's having problems with the devil and, all that and stuff. And, basically this guy's like, yeah, she's like, or devil's like that sometimes or something like that. I don't remember exactly what he says. This part's kind of cringy.
Yeah.
Like it's not really that, like it's supposed to be like, real like, like heartfelt, and like he's supposed to learn a lesson from what this guy says. And basically the understanding that you get is that this guy's like either Jesus or God.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It's really gray,
Yeah, and he just kind of gives this like sort of like really cringy kind of like talk about like
your soul doesn't belong to you anyway. And he's like, what do you mean? Who does it belong to? And he's like, it belongs to God.
Yeah, it's
like, oh, okay.
It's not. This is the low point of the movie in my mind. There's nothing really of substance here, but magically somehow Elliot's like, oh, I understand now.
Yeah, he like has some time to contemplate. He sleeps on it, thinks about it. A very faded montage just shows him sitting in the cell thinking. And then the next morning he's released apparently, and he goes and finds the club where the devil's at. He goes in there, and it's full of old people instead of all the young folks that were filled in the beginning, which is hilarious. I love that. And so he's looking at all this debauchery of people partying, and then like the devil finds him, and she's just as like, I don't know, Aphrodite or something. And then she like changes into an angel, and then he's like, it's Halloween or something, I guess. I don't know. But she like hands him the contract. He's like, I'm not going to do it, basically. And she's like, yeah, you're going to do it. You owe me 7 wishes. But he's refusing to do it. He says, no. Like I've learned my lesson. Like I know I'm not going to, like I've learned enough along the path where I don't need you anymore, basically. And I'm not going to do a 7th
Yeah,
wish.
he's basically like, there's nothing that you can give me that I want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And basically she gets really, really mad and really ticked off at him. And then like, I'll see you in hell. And she like, the whole room transforms. He's on this like random pillar and surrounded by fire. And she's now the actual devil.
And she's like gigantic and has a pitchfork.
Has a pitchfork. She tries to stab him with it. It misses. He grabs onto it. He's like, oh, and she's like, you know, the big weenie roast. And she's like, give me the wish. And so what does he wish for, David? He wishes for somebody else's life to be happy.
Yeah, he says, I wish that Allison could be happy.
That's all he says.
Yep.
And then she rolls her eyes. He lets go, falls down into hell, into the fire. And then we fade to white. And we go in front of the steps of a courtroom where he's laying there. And he's like, is this heaven? And then she's like, and it's the devil. And she's like, no, just a couple lawyers I have to meet for lunch. Come on. So basically,
yeah, he learns. He learns that there was, because he didn't actually read the contract. So he learns that in the contract there's a clause where if he truly uses his wish to truly do something selfless and good for someone else, then it voids the contract and his soul no longer belongs to the devil.
And apparently that because he did a selfless thing, she voids it. And he's like, yes, I get to keep my soul. And like the devil has some remorse here. And she's really saying, yeah, you know, I really liked you. You were cool, but yeah, whatever. Go have a happy life, you know? And so he's free. He gets to go. He's prancing. He's excited. And then finally, the next day at work, he finds Allison and he goes to talk to her. And basically what happens, long story short, she shuts him down. She's like, I'm sorry, but no thank you, and walks away.
Yeah, she says like, I have a boyfriend.
Yeah, something like that.
Or basically, she says, she basically tells him she's already taken.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, okay. And then, he's walking down the street all dejected and sad.
Oh, wait, but the coworker, though, that goes up to him, the other coworkers, they have one more final, like, confrontation with him where they go up to him like he would to them earlier in the film. And he's, like, just over it and grabs him and, like, threatens him and just pushes him away. And everybody else is, like, scared of him, like, oh, like, he's a different person. He's changed, you know, because of all these experiences. But yeah, he's down on his luck. He's biking up a hill. And then what happens, David? He's biking up a hill. He
just kind of like, he comes across this, he's going up a residential street in San Francisco, you know, all those houses on hills that they have down there.
Houses on hills.
And basically he just kind of like notices, he just kind of gets stopped in front of one of the houses by the hustle and bustle of somebody moving into one of them. And basically this lady comes out and she asks if he would be willing to give her a hand, and he's like, sure. And he goes and helps her, and they kind of, they basically, because earlier in the film we find out that what Elliot's really into, he's an audiophile.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He likes home theater equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's like speakers that he really wanted or that he just got.
Yeah,
That's what he was telling his coworkers.
Yep. And they're like just not interested at all. But then, so fast forward to the end. It just so happens that while they're talking, this woman brings up that she just got some nice home theater speakers as well. And turns out she's a fellow audiophile.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I'm intrigued. Of course I'll give you a hand.
Yeah.
And he picks up a box and follows her into the house. And presumably they get to know each other and have a happy life together. But we don't actually know that. The movie just kind of ends there.
Yeah, and then we see them walking through the park. And Sister Hazel starts playing, of course. It's the end of the movie. And you see the devil playing chess with the guy that he was in jail with. Presumably it's God, apparently, playing chess in the park.
Or Jesus.
Or Jesus, or
something
whoever.
Like that. Maybe an angel. I don't know.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, look, it's them. Oh, that's so cute. And then, like, Sister Hazel's playing as they're walking down this way. And also there's a random Buddhist monk to the left.
Yeah.
And then the movie ends.
Yeah, basically the ending was good and bad in a way. Because it was good in that it was like, you know, he didn't like get the fairy tale ending where he, you know, got with the person he was in love with. But in getting rejected by her, he found somebody else. And the movie doesn't tell you that, oh, they lived happily ever after. It's just kind of like they meet, they hit it off, and then we're just kind of left to imagine what their life together moving forward could be like. So I like that part of it, but then also the whole cringy thing with the Jesus angel whatever thing in the prison, and
doesn't really work.
The devil like being like after the contract's broken at the courthouse, you know, she just starts talking about, you know, it's heaven and hell. It's all, you know, it's what you make it, you know?
Well, I think I can't remember exactly what she said, but she says something to the extent of it's about the journey, I think.
Well,
which is trying to salvage like a message from this story, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, it's just really like, I mean,
don't get me wrong, it's like a good message.
Like it is a good message, but I'm talking specifically about her monologue at the end.
Yeah.
Where she's just like, you know, heaven and hell, it's like, you know, people think it's like it's a place in the great beyond, but really it's just, you know, what you make it, or something really cringy.
Yeah, really cringy.
Stupid like that, you know? It's totally this like sort of like wishy-washy sort of like non-believers.
Yeah. Like secular.
Yeah, secular non-believers, you know, sort of idea of what you know, good versus evil, justice versus injustice, heaven versus hell is really all about, because you know those people are so insightful about Christian theology, you know.
Yes, of course.
it's like
somebody took a theology class.
It's one of those things. It's a lot. It reminds me, the theology, I do that in air quotes, of this movie reminds me a lot of Dogma. It's like it was written, you know, it's like cringy, like fedora wearing atheist theology. That's basically what I can describe it as.
That's a good way, I'd say, of describing it. It's very suitable for what we're dealing with in this movie. But yeah, that's Bedazzled. Very enjoyable. I'd recommend it. It's a fun watch.
Definitely.
You know.
Definitely. Very entertaining.
Yeah, and there's definitely something you can pull away from it, and whether it be about finding yourself or figuring out what to do in life or confidence, I don't know. But
and you know, too, I feel like there's probably a lot of people out there who miss this movie.
Oh yeah.
Because it wasn't a huge box office hit.
No.
It wasn't a flop, but it wasn't a huge hit either. It just kind of didn't really make a splash. And so I'm assuming people of my age group probably, like me, saw it a lot on TV back in the early 2000s. But everybody else probably missed out on it. So I would say that for all of our Snarp Fangle listeners who fit into that category, I would say give this movie a shot.
Yeah, or give it another shot and take a crack at it. You can rent it pretty much anywhere, and I don't think it's on any streaming services right now, but yeah, it's worth the rent. That's for sure. So, all right. Well, yeah, we'd recommend Bedazzled.
Indeed.
Even though we thought it would be bad.
Yeah, I was certain it was going to be a terrible movie, but I was wrong. Yeah.
You're never wrong, David. Come on. Anyway, so all right, David. So our second film is it was my pick, and it's Flight of the Navigator. So basically, let's see, how do I want to start with this film? Basically, the concept is this kid falls down a ravine, wakes up 8 years later. It's 1986 now, and somehow, somewhere, he got kidnapped by an alien, and he's trying to track him down again. But we don't know all that at the very beginning. So that's basically what it's about. But I think, let's see, I remember watching this as a kid. I remember I remember enjoying it, but I also remember, like, I don't know, it has this nostalgic warmth. Whenever I watched this, we watched it again last night, and I got that same nostalgic warmth. And I expected this and only remember it being bad in my eyes. But kind of like Bedazzled, I was pleasantly sort of surprised. There are a few quips I have with it, but I don't know. What's your history with Flight of the Navigator, David?
Not much, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I watched it once or twice as a young child. I think like my mom rented it from the video store or something once. And I watched it and basically never thought about it again until you brought it up.
Yeah, well, it was directed by a fella named Randall Kleiser, and then stars this Joey Kramer fella as somebody named David Freeman. And it also stars Paul Reubens, as we'll get into later. But yeah, I don't have much love for this film. Like, I remember watching it a few times when I was a child, and then never revisiting it after that. Like, maybe last time I watched it was like when I was 9 or something. Like, I remember we had the DVD or VHS of it, and we'd just watch it a couple times. And I remember the time my parents sat us down and watched it for the very first time, and I remember enjoying it. But I only watched it maybe 1 or 2 times after that, and just didn't really get much joy out of it, and kind of thought it was a little cringy. I think I was really little though when we first watched it, because I remember being like, I want to say it must have been like 5 or something, because I remember being horrified by the way the brothers talk to each other, like you chum bucket or whatever. It's like, oh my god, this is terrible. How dare they do that? So, but anyway, Flight of the Navigator, 1986. Walt Disney Company releases it. Buena Vista Distribution. It's a fine film. After sleeping on it, I think it's fine film. It was entertaining enough. I liked specifically the pacing of the film was really good, and specifically how the mysteries unfold to the audience and how it keeps you along. I really like that, and it handles it really, really. I would say it's pretty good in that sense. I think the kid acting's okay. I don't know. What do you think of the kid acting in this? It's not great. But
it's not amazing, but it's serviceable.
Yeah, serviceable.
None of the child characters are I should say what is going on?
My fans on my computer are just ramping
Holy
up.
crap, dude. Yeah. I thought that was coming from outside or something.
No, I'm just streaming the film on Disney Plus. That's all that's happening right now.
Goodness gracious.
I have 3 tabs open.
I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard the fan in my laptop start up.
You have a MacBook Air, David. That's different.
It's a Pro. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, a Pro. Regardless, there's a fanless design. So
no, this one has a fan.
Oh, it does have a fan?
Yeah,
it's
this
Pro.
one has a fan.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, this one has a fan.
Nice laptop. It's a nice laptop. Mine, it can get loud sometimes. Also, it's plugged in, so that might be why too. So maybe
I seriously thought that was
it's hyperventilating.
Someone there was someone was like trimming trees outside of our door or
Somebody spraying the
something.
orchard across the street. What is that? I can hear it through the walls.
I heard it like
It's literally right here.
yeah, I heard it like several times while we were
I could tell it was bothering you.
while
too.
we were talking. I'm just like, what is that?
You're looking back and forth. But anyway, yeah, the Flight of the Navigator. This was a huge, apparently big deal when it came out. I was talking.
Was
to my,
it?
Yeah, I was talking to my mom last night about it, and she was like, "Oh yeah, when it came out, I think it was '86, so I think Thad would be too young, but I think they took Angie to go see it in theaters." And they all had they were all like really impressed with it. They're like, wow, this is actually pretty good. Like grandma would take them to go see it and they had a really good time. And it was apparently a big deal when it came out, but it only made like 18 million bucks. By the way, this is 86. This is you and me were talking about this last night. This is the dark age of Disney.
Indeed, yes.
Like Black Cauldron came out 2 years or the year before.
Yeah, 1 year before.
1 year before. It's officially the dark age. We're at the height of it right now over the Disney era. It's not going to get over until the 90s roll around.
Well,
I know
89,
89 was
right?
Little Mermaid.
Little
yeah.
Mermaid kicked off the Disney Renaissance, if I recall.
Yes, but I don't know if everybody like recognized that until maybe the follow-up to that came out, is my argument.
Yeah, well,
I didn't live through that era, is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I think nobody saw Little Mermaid come out and be like, oh, we're in the middle of the Disney Renaissance.
Yeah.
Obviously that label came afterwards, but I mean, it's applied to that era from Little Mermaid in 89 to, I believe, Mulan in 2001.
I think so.
What year did Mulan come out?
I'm gonna look it up. Mulan. I'm gonna get 98.
98. Okay, so
it was still in the Renaissance at that point.
yeah. Well, I mean, Mulan. I know specifically Mulan was like the last film was like the film that marks the end of the Disney Renaissance. Like it was still part of it, but the films after Mulan are not considered to be part of the Disney Renaissance.
Yeah. Like probably like Toy Story 2 and stuff like that. Well, that was part of the Renaissance because that was before Mulan. Was it
Toy
98?
Story was.
Toy Story 1, 2 though. That was 98, 99?
Oh, I don't remember when that
I think
came
it was
out.
2000. Oh wait, we saw it on last night on Disney Plus. It was the 25th anniversary, so it was 99.
Yeah.
So yeah, technically, I guess we don't count it as the Renaissance.
Also, at that point, there was a distinction between Pixar and Disney movies.
Yeah.
Even though they were Disney movies.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, people were differentiating between Disney's animated features and Pixar movies.
Would we argue that the Dark Ages of Disney started with Black Cauldron or with the Black Crystal? Or the Dark Crystal, excuse me.
I don't know.
Because that was 82.
I don't know if Disney's dark period necessarily has like a defined movie to movie era the same way the Disney Renaissance does. But the Dark Crystal, I think, was probably represents a low point for Disney as well. But yeah, I think generally when they talk about the dark ages of Disney, most of the talk is centered on the era, the years leading up to and including the release of the Black Cauldron.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like maybe in my mind, it looks like maybe the Dark Crystal kind of teetered toward the Dark Ages, like, oh, we're not in a good spot. And then Black Cauldron officially started it, probably.
Yeah, so the Disney Renaissance was like a plateau. Like you have Little Mermaid in 89, smashing success, instantaneous high point, and then they just carry on this like winning streak till they hit Mulan. And then I think we have after that we have like movies like Brother Bear and Treasure.
Atlantis was one of them.
Yeah, Atlantis, Treasure Planet.
Treasure Planet ended it.
Yeah, that were just not nearly as successful. So from Little Mermaid to Mulan, you have like basically a plateau.
Yeah.
Like it goes up, plateau, and then after Mulan, drops right off again. With the decline of Disney in the 80s, I think it was more like a pit. You know, they were on a continuous decline through the 80s down to Black Cauldron, which was their low point.
Yeah.
And then after Black Cauldron, they had to kind of slowly climbed out of the hole that they had put themselves into.
I'm looking at some articles right now, and some people consider the Dark Age to start at 1970. And I don't know if I agree with that, because you have stuff like Aristocats, Robin Hood, Winnie the Pooh came out in 77, as well as Rescuers. So
yeah, they had good movies in those
but
period,
I think,
and they also weren't they maybe weren't the, you know, kind of smashing success that like Aladdin or The Lion King was, but they are memorable and beloved films in their own right.
Yeah.
And like you could, like, that's why I say I think the decline was like a gradual thing, because you see sort of the beginnings of it. If I remember correctly, it was Robin Hood, maybe, that had like reused animation.
Oh yeah,
frames
Robin Hood, yeah,
from previous movies.
It's like, it's so noticeable in that movie. Like animations from The Jungle Book, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, pretty much all of their other stuff, they just used the frame animations and reused them.
Yeah.
To kind of make the film.
So
like recycled shots, basically.
So they were on the decline, even though those films at that point, even though Robin Hood itself is widely held to be a beloved Disney classic.
Yeah, well, also Disney did pass away, I want to say, in the late 70s. And so you have, like, in 77, Winnie the Pooh, and I don't remember when he died, but I want to say he got to see that, but I don't know if he saw anything after that. Like, after that, the 80s start. In 81, we get The Fox and the Hound, and then Black Cauldron right after that. Like, well, not right after, but in 85.
Yeah.
So that was probably just like, we're in the Dark Ages, guys.
And Black Cauldron, I think, is like the absolute low point, and everything else was kind of just like a slow decline into the pit that was Black Cauldron. Because Black Cauldron was basically like, from what I understand, that movie nearly bankrupted Disney. It flopped so badly.
Wow.
And I personally kind of have a soft spot for it, but basically Disney for many years just kind of like didn't want to acknowledge that it existed. Like there's I think there's a Blu-ray release of it now. Maybe. But like for the longest time there was like one VHS release of it. And I think like one DVD release of it. And I'm not sure if there's a Blu-ray release of it or not.
Apparently there was. I'm just looking on Amazon and it's like $100, so it's out of stock, but there technically was a Blu-ray release. I'm thinking maybe the style looks like mid to early 20-teens, maybe.
Yeah, but definitely,
they probably released it and never after that.
Yeah, it's one of those what they call from the vault sort of releases, where they, you know, go back to something forgotten and bring it out, and then it's like, okay, we're done with this now. But yeah, for most of the time, Disney, it seemed like, wanted to just forget about its existence. Yeah. but then
the year after you have this film, but you also have like The Great Mouse Detective you and me were talking about.
Yeah,
which is
that's
fantastic.
Right.
Like that movie's awesome.
Yeah, they definitely started the process of climbing out of the hole after pretty quickly after Black Cauldron came out.
Yeah,
because you had this film, which was, I mean, I'm not gonna say it was, you know, a smash, huge, big budget blockbuster.
And it didn't make that whole lot of money either.
But they spent a fair amount of money on it. There's some
definitely high quality.
There's some decent special effects in here. And then of course, Great Mouse Detective, amazing movie, great animation, great voice acting, especially from what's his face?
Vincent Price.
Vincent Price, yes. I think it was like his second to last movie made too. He was extremely old
Yeah.
when he recorded that part, and yet his age doesn't come across
No,
in
not
the
at all.
performances at all.
Like, he's
there's so
fantastic.
much life and so much energy in the performance, even though he died very shortly after making it. But yeah, so anyway, we have the hole that was Black Cauldron, and then 1 year later, Disney crawled out of it the same way.
I would say they crawled out of it. You still have Little Mermaid 4 years later, right? They started the process. Because you had like Oliver and Company after that.
Yeah.
You had Grace Mountain Detective, Brave Little Toaster, Oliver and Company.
Yeah.
And then you had Little Mermaid.
Yeah, but it was a gradual crawl. 1 year later, they were in the process of crawling out of the hole that they had put themselves into, much in the same way that our hero David Freeman crawls out of a ravine in this movie.
In this movie, exactly. Yeah, so anyway, continuing on with what we think of the film. That was a big segue. Great job, Dave. Shout out to you. Okay, so I gotta say, I was very impressed by this film. I had very low expectations going in, but I was genuinely and pleasantly surprised. But I remember you said you watched it. What did you think overall of the film last night?
I thought it was pretty decent.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't amazing.
No.
But it wasn't terrible either.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say it's like a highly recommended movie for me, but if you're in the mood for some, corny, family-friendly sci-fi, I mean, you could do a lot worse than this film.
Oh, yeah. And I think this would be a great, like, if I was introducing, like, if I had kids right now, and they were like 4 or 5 years old, I would sit them down. Maybe they wouldn't last through the whole film in terms of attention wise, but they're my kids. They got to do it. So I would sit them down and watch this. And I think we would, I would, as a parent, sit down and watch it with them. And I think we would have a good time as well. Like, oh, there's the robot. And we shouldn't say that to our brothers and sisters. They're wrong, and they regret it,
Yeah, it's a good family
It's a good
film.
family film. So, and dude, Alan Silvestri does the score for this, and the main motif really is really pleasant as well to listen to. And I think overall the soundtrack's okay, but
yeah,
the 80s pop that comes in kind of takes you out of it. But
it's not amazing, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, it's not fantastic, but I mean, the guy did Back to the Future the year before,
Yeah.
So he was like kind of spent, I'd imagine.
They can't all be winners.
They can't all be winners, So anyway, so let's see. Where do we want to go from here? Oh, David, while I was looking up this film randomly on IMDb, there was a film called Runaway with Tom Selleck in 1984.
I've never heard of that.
And it looks really
bad.
Not terrible, but it doesn't look great either. And I'll show you to the trailer afterward. But let's dive into the plot of Flight of the Navigator, David. From what little much there is. But we get started off, David, with a montage of dogs catching frisbees.
Yeah. What's interesting too is I think, spoiler alert, this movie involves aliens.
Yeah.
So what I think it was going for was because the very first thing we see is a silver frisbee flying through the air.
Well, we don't know if it's a frisbee. We just see a saucer.
Yeah, but we see a silver disc in the air. And I think, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say we were meant to be like, is that a flying saucer? Is that a UFO? Is that an alien spaceship?
And then just a dog's jaw comes out of nowhere and goes like, "Rah!" and just bites on it.
Yeah.
And then the music starts and we get the credits, the opening credits.
Yep. And dogs catching frisbees in slow motion.
In slow mo. And I love the shots they put in here of the dogs missing. It's so gold, comedy gold. It's like, how can you not love this opening, I guess? It's just, I was expecting to see it in the opening to Flight of the Navigator.
It's really funny because it's so out of place. And yet at the same time, because it's so out of place, it kind of makes it entertaining.
Yeah.
You're just like, what is going on here?
Yeah. You're like, what the heck? And then, and that's, I think they did it pretty well. Like you're like, oh, here's the saucer. It's going to be an alien movie, and nope, there's dogs. So yeah. But speaking of dogs, we have the oldest looking border collie known to man playing around with our main character David Freeman, and let me just tell you, this dog looks like it's a rescue. I feel really bad for the dog. It looks like he was abused, like unnecessarily its whole life.
I don't know if he looks like he was abused, but he's pretty tired and
he's old. He
doesn't have the pep in his step, and he's also not so good with the frisbee handling. We see him trying to like pick up a frisbee off the ground, and he's struggling with it.
Not the most athletic dog as well.
And it's just like not necessarily because he's like old and frail, but because he can't like navigate the whole, like he seems to have trouble with the idea of like using his lower jaw to, tilt the frisbee up so he can actually get a hold of it. Mm-hmm. He seems to have trouble with that part. So he's just kind of like pushing the frisbee like inch by inch on the ground.
Yeah.
And then, the younger brother of our main character, David Freeman, comes by and, basically says what we were thinking.
Yep. That's an old dog. Or like your dog, what does he say? He says your dog's going to die or something.
Well, he's like, that dog will never catch a frisbee or something like that.
That dog will never catch a frisbee.
And the, this is in the era when the R word wasn't the R word.
Oh yes, that's right.
So he straight up called this little kid calls David Freeman's dog a retard.
And boy, does the dog look like it. Let's say. So we get distracted from the frisbee, like, oh, it's not aliens. Okay, well, it's family plan. So they head back to their station wagon with the dog and the fam after the dog competition is done. But I don't know who won. I want to know if that black Doberman won, but apparently not. So anyway, they're going back to the car and they're loading up, and then all of a sudden the shadow starts going over the crowd, and you're like, oh crap, oh here we go, aliens. And then they're looking up, it's ominous music, and then they look up and it's just a blimp flying over the South Miami skyline. Or South Florida skyline. We're in Fort Lauderdale, apparently. So the family is, it's 4th of July, 1978. The family is enjoying their day. They're driving down the road from the place, heading home. And then the young brother is like, oh, I have a punchable face and a buck tooth. My friends are playing across the street. Can I go play with them? And he's like, yeah, just don't get too wet. It's going to be a little chilly tonight, but it's like the middle of summer in Florida. Come on, it's not going to be that one. Anyway, the little brother, they stop. The little brother hops out, steals, just nabs a water pistol from his buddy and starts running after the truck with his older brother in there, starts spraying him with the water gun. And he's like, you butt face, Gus Bucket. And just like, these brothers are just a delight,
Yes.
So then they go home. The brother and the David and the dog go upstairs. And then the father follows him upstairs after a little while. And he's like, hey, what you doing, sport? And the David's like got a telescope out of the window. And he's spying on the girl he likes or whatever. Because apparently she biked by when they got home. And she went to, I don't know, somewhere, and he can see her with the telescope. He's peeping on her,
Well, it's not as creepy as
it's not
sounds.
creepy,
She's
the kid's only 12.
She's in a boat.
She's in a boat with her friends.
Yeah, she's in a boat with her friends, and he's just, watching her in the boat.
Yeah.
So it's like, obviously, and then... Yeah, but he tries to hide it. He's like, I was just watching the boats.
I'm watching the boats.
And the dad's like, really? Okay. And goes and takes a look, and then, then of course, once he realizes what his son is doing, he's like, okay, it's time to have the talk.
All he tells the kid is, well, hey, if you want to talk to a girl, sometimes you gotta learn to swim by jumping in the water, ask her, oh, that's a cool bike. He encourages him and stuff like that, but he doesn't have the talk with him.
I thought that was a joke. That was a joke. I mean, clearly it was the beginnings of the talk, and it was like because
it's the introductory. We're getting the introduction.
He's of the age, he's of the age where he's either in the beginnings of, or he's going through the change, as they call it. So it's like it's as much of the talk as you're gonna see
in a
from
Disney movie.
Yeah, family friendly Disney movie.
So the dog, whose name is Bruiser, heads off with David come nighttime, and then they go to pick up the younger brother, and they're going through the woods, the jungle of Florida. What would you describe it as?
It's just the woods. Basically,
woods.
he's like
the tropical forests of Florida.
Nah. It's a deciduous forest, all right?
What a word to use. Okay, yes, we'll say that. Deciduous forest.
I actually forgot. I actually forget what deciduous means, so I could be completely wrong on that.
Well, while you look that up, he goes through this forest, this prodigious forest, as we've established. Prodigious forest, I couldn't remember what you said.
Deciduous.
That's how short-term memory I have. So anyway, he goes through, and it's real foggy. It's creepy. It's the 4th of July. For some reason, there's no fireworks in the background going off. And he finds a ravine. He's like, "Ooh, what's this? Oh, it's an embankment. Holy crap." And turns out, before that, the brother sneaks up on him, jumps down from a tree and scares him and runs back to the house, calls him some obscenities and runs away. And then he's like, "I'm going to get you." But he then goes a little deeper in the forest and finds a ravine. He looks too far down there, and then he grabs onto a branch to peer down, and boom! The branch snaps. He falls down onto his arm, presumably breaking nearly his arm while he does that. He probably fell about 20 feet, is my guess, from what we're presented with. And so he gets knocked out, apparently, and then he's like, "Whoa!" And he wakes up. He's like, "What's going on?" And then he decides to slowly crawl from the dark age of Disney out into the open forest again. And the dog's not there either. So the dog ran away. David fell down. He gets out. He goes back to the house. It's locked. He's like, "That piece of crap brother of mine, I'm going to kill him." And he doesn't say that, but he bangs on the door and he's like, "I'm going to get you." And this old lady answers. David, what happens after the old lady answers?
He's very shocked and distraught. He's like, "Who are you?"
She's like, "Where's your mom?"
Yeah, basically. And he's like, "Where's my parents? Where's my mom and dad?" And he runs into the house, and she's just like, "Oh my God,
I don't know how to handle a child." So he runs to the kitchen, runs out. The house is different. He then runs up the stairs, and he runs into his room, which is now an old man's study.
Yep.
Yeah, this old man in a robe is chilling with the windows open, reading his newspaper, and he handles it really well when the guy just barges into his room. He stands up, throws his newspaper on the ground, puts his hands behind his back, and he's like, "What's the problem, son?" And he's just gently like, "Hey, what's going on?" Obviously, this is a child who's losing it, so we'll handle it delicately. So then the kid runs back down halfway through the stairs, collapses on the stairs. He's like, "Where's my mom and dad?" Really scary scenario if you're a kid. I'm not saying this film was traumatizing to me, but it was scary in that sense. Holy crap, this kid's alone. What do you do? What do you do as a 12-year-old? I don't know. I'm only 8 watching this film, I don't know. So anyway, we see him and the cops in the police station. There's a bunch of missing juvenile posters on the walls behind him, and you're like, "Whoa, this is not good. What's happening?" He looks behind him. There's some power outage in Fort Lauderdale General Hospital. And so then this cop is talking to him. The electricity apparently went out there, and the cop's like, "Hey, we ran your name in the computer, and it turns out you came up, but you're missing kids, so let's go find your parents." But then the chick, lady cop comes over, and she's like, "But wait, look at the dates, sir." And he's like, "Oh, that can't be good. That's not right. I'm not Danny Glover." And then, and then he's like, "It must be a typo." She's like, "No, it's not a typo. It says 1978. And he's like, what does that mean? And she's like, we ran it through the computer 3 times. There's no mistake. He's been declared illegally dead. He's like, who's dead? And this kid, like, he has some outbursts here. And it's very, sometimes pretty cringy. It's not great. Anyway, they then go on a trip in the cop car, and find his parents today. Apparently, were revealed to us the year's 1986. And his parents are older. He barely recognizes him. He runs to his dad, and then he stops when he realizes his dad don't look like the same thing he did. He's 8 years older. He's starting to bald more, and they have a different dog. And then the mom comes out, and they grab him. They're like, oh, thank God you're okay. And they're put off by him too. They're like, what's going on? But they like grab him. They're so happy. And then like the boy faints. And then after that, we're cut to the electricity that was down earlier. And the electricity was down because some freaking flying saucer ran into some power transformers in Florida there. And apparently NASA is on the scene and they're looking for it. They mosey around and look around, and then we cut to the hospital. And David, what happens at the hospital where we find David waking up from his knockout impression of his older parents?
Yeah, he wakes up in the hospital. He doesn't know quite what to think. And, well, we meet a certain person.
Yeah.
We meet a certain person.
We meet a certain person with a punchable face, you know?
It turns out his younger brother is now a teenager.
Has now a little older brother now.
And, he just can't process it. He's like, no, this can't be right. This can't be real.
Yeah.
He just basically he's in a state of shock. He doesn't know how to process anything that's happening to him, which is understandable.
Totally.
If this situation happened, you wouldn't know how to process it.
Yeah. So, yeah, we see, I can't remember the brother's name, but the brother like says hi to him and he can't believe it. He's like, holy cow, I can't believe this, David. Like, you're alive, but you look exactly the same. And he's like, you're supposed to be 20 years old by now. And he's 16. So it's a big shock. They have a nice little heart to heart, but David is still really put off, teary eyed, doesn't know how to comprehend it. And then the mom stays overnight with him. And then we cut to NASA base. And you know what? They got the saucer, man. They got all the sauce in the saucer. And we see them putting it into a facility. And then we cut to David waking up, and his older brother or his younger brother is now taking care of him during the night. And he wakes up and he's like, whoa, who's that? What was your name? And he's like, what are you talking about? And so something in his dream is communicating to him or talking to him as he's trying to recover from all this. So after that, we see some scientists. We go back and forth between the scientists analyzing the saucer and some tests being run on David. This lady psychiatrist person is like asking David all these questions, and they're doing tests on him with all these like things on his brain, on his head. And basically when he answers a question like, how old are you? And he says 12. Basically on the computer in the monitoring room where the parents are and the doctors are, on the computer screen, there's all these different images popping up, including the saucer itself, by just answering some simple questions. So it's like his brain has different knowledge inside it that is communicating with the computer, and he is just relaying the simple information that he's aware of. So obviously something's going on. Something more than meets the eye here. It could be Transformers, I don't know. But then we hear that the NASA scientists get word. They have a come hitherto, and they see that there's something going on in this hospital. So they go and they meet David. They're trying to convince him to go to their hospital or their facilities to do further tests on him. The family doesn't want anything to do with it. They're like, we're free. We get to go home. We now have the same situation we had before. We had a young son and a younger son, and we still have that scenario, but it's in a different form. So let's go home. And so then the NASA scientist is like, but don't you want to know the truth? And that makes everybody stop. They're like, wait, yeah, we want to know the truth. And so then the NASA scientist gives his pitch. He's like, I just need you for 48 hours. You'll be well taken care of. And it's like, hey, like you'll be doing a great service for us. We are trying to figure out something, and you'd be a very key part of all that. So he looks at his family. He then looks back to the guy, and he decides, yes, I'm going to do this. So then David, they take him to the facility, and on the way, he hears a weird voice as they're passing by some of the NASA buildings.
Yes, like a metallic whispering sort of sound, but you can't make out what it's saying.
Kind of like the background audio of Depeche Mode album is basically what he hears. So the NASA scientist leads him into the room he's going to be staying in with a bunch of toys that he has no idea what they are because this is 86 and he's a 78 kid. He don't know what Transformers is. He doesn't know what the Empire Strikes Back means. He just knows Star Wars is a thing. That's all he knows. So then he turns on the TV. He's like, oh my God, there's people singing. And then all of a sudden he's so traumatized by this. And then all of a sudden the door opens behind him and there's a freaking robot that comes in and he's like, oh my God. And then some perky little horse face chick comes out from behind the robot and it's Sarah Jessica Parker. So anyway, basically what happens is Sarah Jessica Parker is telling David, oh yeah, it's 1986 and you don't know what MTV is? And then she's like, oh yeah, this is your robot, Rolf, who's going to deliver the food. And he's like my assistant. And he's like, clear the way. I'm here to serve you. And some acronym, but they call him Rolf. And they have a nice little conversation. They reference some modern pop culture stuff of the 80s. And the kid mentions some stuff about the 70s. He's like, my mom took me to Bee Gees just a couple months back. And she's like, oh, we just went to go see Twisted Sister last night. He's like, what the heck's Twisted Sister? Which my I think a lot of kids had that question as well.
Yeah. Twisted Sister is one of those things that I don't think kids of today are aware of the just the bizarre thing that is Twisted Sister.
Yeah, and we don't even get the Twisted Sister on the TV. It's some other random.
Yeah, it's a band that neither of us had actually heard of. I had to Google it. It's like Blanc Mage or something.
Blanc Mage.
It's some like British synth pop band capitalizing on the success of Depeche Mode, basically.
Which sounds completely worth my time, I think. So I'm going to have to take a look at what Blanc Mage means later. But anyway, so they have a conversation in the room. They're talking, have a nice little heart-to-heart. And then basically the doctor and David, after like a period of time, get on the phone with the parents, let him know how he's doing. And then they start doing a bunch of tests on the kid. And the kid gets really scared. He starts doing the same thing he did in the other hospital where they'd ask him a question, he'd answer it, and on the computer screen, a completely different thing pops up. So like, and it's basically, they have a thing where it's analyzing his thoughts.
Also too, they're like asking him questions that he clearly doesn't know the answer to, and he's like, what do you mean? What? I don't understand what you're saying. But meanwhile, the readout of the computer is answering their question.
Mm-hmm. Like, they're like, what's your name? And he doesn't say it. And then it just pops up on the screen. It's really pretty interesting stuff. And then they start like poking and prodding him like, hey, where have you been? Like, what is all this? And then they start seeing all these like star charts on the computer screens. And they're like, what the heck's going on? And it's like every uncharted, basically galaxy in existence apparently flashes onto the screen. And so they're doing it and it goes so fast. It traumatizes David. He throws the thing off. He runs away. He goes back to his room. He's like, I'm going to get out of here. And then Sarah Jessica Parker comes back in with Rolf. And she's like, what are you talking about? Your name's on the meal plan for like the next week. And he's like, that cheater, I can't believe it. And so we feel bad for this kid. He's basically a test experiment at this point. But how's he going to get out of here? So Sarah Jessica Parker talks to him and they basically figure out a plan. She's like, oh, don't worry, I'll get you out, you know? And so the next morning he wakes up and Rolf comes into the thing serving him breakfast. He crawls into Rolf with his stuff and Rolf takes him out of the room and off to somewhere. And it turns out Rolf takes him to the UFO.
The saucer.
The saucer with all the sauce in it. All the Pee Wee Herman sauce you can imagine. Because we go into the saucer and the kid goes in there and turns out there's a robot. And I was like, whoa, there's a robot, David. And before that, actually, we saw like a fire truck that almost runs over Rolf. All this stuff starts happening. And then he's in here for quite a while. And then like all the base basically like high alert starts roaming around. They some monitors in the saucer see that it's open. They're like, oh my God, we need to throw up the security measures, which we've never practiced before, or we've practiced, but it's never happened before. So they're reading a manual, trying to figure out what to do. We get some high impact scenes of people running, people screaming on the base, running to see what's going on at the saucer. The kid is like trying to figure out as well what's going on in here. He finds the robot. He's talking to him. And the robot has a really awesome voice, by the way. At this point, really, really neat. I'm like, man, who's this voice actor? What's going on, David? Like, this is a pretty cool voice. And then we find out that it's the voice of, and I looked it up. We're like, man, what is that voice? As this whole scene is procuring. And they're surrounding the saucer, and the saucer starts lifting up. There's a conversation with the robot. And basically the robot's like, oh, you're my navigator. We're in a hostile alien environment. Are you ready to get out of here? And he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you're my navigator. Like, you're the guy that's in charge and to operate this vehicle. And he's like, no, just take me out of here. And he's like, okay. And so he starts getting out of there, and all the NASA scientists are freaking out. And then they go out of the base. And he's like, get me 20 miles away from here. And he's like, okay. It just goes, like, ascends straight into the sky and goes 20 miles up in the air. He's like, no, I mean 20 miles out on the land. And so some pandemonium happens. The scientist is trying to figure out. He's talking to the robot, and I don't remember exactly what happens after this. But David, what happens after they get into the air? Like, they then come down.
Yeah, so basically he's like, no, I didn't mean straight up. So, the robot is like, okay, and then drops the ship back down to where he was, and then they sort of set out across the land, basically.
Yeah. Across the wide Florida landscape,
Well, at this point, they could be anywhere. I think they go quite far, if I remember correctly. They stop over a field of cows so that David can relieve himself.
Yep, that's exactly what happens, and the best place to do it is around cows because nobody's going to tell. So. Anyway, they stop there. I think they're still in Florida, though, because he says, go 20 miles away from here this way or whatever. He's like, okay. So he goes that way. And the robot's trying to figure out what's going on. You've never once went to the bathroom. You have all the star charts, and I need them. So I need all the star charts. When I crash into the electrical facility or whatever, turns out when he crashed into it, he lost a lot of the data that he had from all the apparent adventures they've been on together. So David has all of that stored in his brain, and the way the movie justifies this is like, oh, the robot says humans only use 10% of their brain, and so the other 90% you've been using to store all the data in, basically.
Well, basically what they say is, this craft just picks up life forms, studies them, and then brings them back to where they were. And so they did that with David. He just happened to be lying in that ravine when that craft landed on Earth, so it picked him up. And this is like, humans are an inferior species. They only use 10% of their brains. So what we did is we filled up the rest of the space with star charts to see what would happen.
That's basically how he tells it to him.
Yeah.
And at this point is where we've both figured out, David, in the film, who plays the robot. Do you want to reveal it? Well, I think we're going to talk about it. But anyway, say it.
Yeah. None other than the amazing Pee Wee Herman himself, Mr. Paul Reubens.
Mr. Paul Reubens. And we were like, wow, that's crazy. Because what happens next explains exactly why they hired Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah. So basically, he sort of makes a deal because the robot doesn't want to let him out of the ship. The robot's like, you need to give me those star charts. And, David's like, I really got to pee. And the robot's like, I don't know what that is. What are you talking about? And so basically he's just like, you let me go. And if you let me go, I'll come right back and then I'll give you the star charts. And so they make a deal, essentially. And he comes back. And is this the part when the brain scan happens?
No. That happens like a little after this. But yeah, they have a conversation saying just what you said. He makes a deal with him. They're 20 miles away. At this point, the helicopters come and they find David. They're like, oh, and this is funny. The dialogue between the helicopters and the guy at the NASA base is ridiculous. He's like, we found him. Make sure he stays there. And it's like, what is, like, if you're the helicopter pilot, what are you going to do? Like,
yeah, make sure he doesn't get away. Oh, he got away.
It's like, he got away. No, go after him. Like, it's like,
we can't even see him anymore.
See him anymore. It's like the dialogue was so a little silly there, I would say.
Yeah.
So anyway, they escape from the. Yeah, they're like, my God, it changed shape, and it just flies away, and the cow's kind of like, ooh.
Yeah.
And he's like, can you follow it? Follow it? I can't even see it. And so they escape. And I think at this point, him and Max, he decides to give the robot a name, and he calls him Max.
Yeah, because the robot says that his name, he is called Trimaxion, I think.
Oh, okay, something like that, yeah.
And the kid's like, I'll call you Max.
Call you Max.
So yeah, and then he agrees to have his brain scanned.
Oh, but before we get to the brain scan, we get the Jim Henson's workshop creatures.
Oh yes, that's right. We see all the various other creatures that Max has picked up for study that he's preparing to take back to their own planets and their own times and whatever.
Or not.
Well, that's what he says.
Yeah.
And then there's some pretty zany creatures.
Yeah, one of them eats his hat, like literally eats the whole NASA hat that he has on.
Yeah, and the Max is like, well, that could have been your head. And then he sees this little like weird like 3-armed, no-legged primate, like mini primate creature that it's kind of cute in its own way. And he's like, what's this? And basically the Max explains that it's that he's really wants to go back home, but Max can't take him home because his planet was destroyed by a comet. And so David's like, oh, so he's an orphan basically. And so from that point on, David and the little weird pocket-sized creature become best buds.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So he like stows away this little creature and hangs out with him. Max is really annoyed by all these creatures. He's like, God, make them quiet. I'm trying to concentrate. And then they get into a conversation where basically they decide, all right, you can. He's like, I need the Star Charge. I need them really bad. And he's like, all right, you can scan my brain. And at this point, the father from the family calls NASA again, like, hey, where's David? We want to talk to him. And then they're like, well, David's not here right now. He's trying to, I don't know what they say.
Well, he's
not available right now.
No, they tell, he's like, well, I just saw him a little bit ago, and he said he just really wants to be by himself right now. And the dad's like, well, can you have him call me when you get a chance? And he's like, yes, when I see him again, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'll have him call. I'll be very happy to have him call you.
So next scene, we get David saying, yes, you can scan my brain, Max, go for it. And so he has him sit down, the chair descends, he lays on the ground, and then he scans his whole body, and then he gets to his head, and he's like, yeah, I got it. And then we figure out why they hired Pee Wee Herman to do this, because there's basically a lot of different Pee Wee Herman variation voices coming out of Max, because he scanned his brain, and now he's got this goofy mindset of a 12-year-old.
Yeah, basically he scanned his brain, and he got the star charts, but he got all of David's, like, pop culture knowledge, his the way he speaks and everything, all that knowledge came with it, and it somehow corrupted Max's personality and turned him into robot Pee Wee Herman.
Can you imagine, David, because you and me were talking about this last night, where Bryce Dallas Howard was hired to do a remake or a reboot of this film for the modern day, and that was back in 2021, so it's definitely not happening now. But can you imagine if she did get the green light on that project and they moved forward with it? Can you imagine after he scanned his brain what kind of obscene brain rot he would be gurgitating to the David character.
Oh yeah.
Can you imagine him just blurting out skibbity toilet and
Skibbity toilet
and all these other kind of modern, crazy, very timely things of the early 2020s? You know, he's gonna be doing the what's it called? Those that cartoon with the colonial guys going dun 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 dun. Like it's just gonna be that and all this random crappy TikTok stuff.
Yeah, basically.
Oh man, that would been. And it'd probably be voiced by Jack Black or something crazy.
Oh yeah, definitely. It would absolutely be voiced by Jack Black.
So what entails is a whole scene of Max saying, hey, we'll show you who's this inferior species, and basically gives David the helm of the ship, but doesn't tell him exactly how to do it right away. And he's, they could crash, they could, oh, and speaking of crashing, he does crush the little creature and all of the pandemonium that happens in this scene. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah,
Where
yeah.
This hand, he's like, huh, and he accidentally crushes the little perk marin or whatever they call him.
Yeah, but it's like it's not hurt or anything.
No,
but he just kind of like pushes
Descends
down on his head a little bit. But the sound effect that it plays is like. Like he squished it.
It's really violent, the sound that they have for the Foley there. But anyway, so he figures out the helm. He's controlling the ship. Basically, Max is getting David to figure out the muscle memory of how he operated the ship, apparently, through the last 8 years. Because David doesn't remember any of this.
Well, I don't think he actually operated the ship.
Oh, really?
I think he's called the Navigator simply because he has the star charts in his head.
So you think he was just maybe one of the creatures he picked up along the way?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, the Max says as much. He's like, I choose a life form from each planet to collect and study, and you were the one I chose from this planet, basically. So I think he was with Max for those 8 years. And they studied him. They obviously experimented on him because they filled up his unused brain space with star charts. And so I think that's why he's called the Navigator, not because he's like been like the captain of this vessel or anything, but simply because he's got all the star chart knowledge in his head. So
basically he's like a hard drive he picked up along the way.
Yeah, I'm assuming that knowledge of how to operate the ship is probably part of the package of knowledge that they put inside his head. So either that or just the technology of the ship is so amazing that anyone can learn how to do it just by instinct. But it doesn't really explain.
And that's kind of like something I like about this film is that it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain what they actually did 8 years. Like if this was released today, you would have a whole montage of him or a whole scene of him going up to a monitor on the ship and seeing footage of what they were doing for those 8 years. Like a lot more would be explained if this was released and made today. And I'm really like looking at this film from today's eyes and the hindsight and seeing where the industry is now. This is a more breath of fresh air.
Even worse, I think, not just showing, but they would tell.
They would have
a character monologue.
Yeah, Max would probably
explaining all of his adventures, and you were doing this and you were doing that, and it would be so boring and long-winded.
Yeah, it would be just so like it would be just there because of a test audience reaction. That's all it would be there for. And I think that's one thing I really like about just going back and seeing not just films from this era, but even older as well, where it was just mostly about the story and what they wanted to convey. Also, this film would also probably be like a 2-hour film today. But this wraps everything in 90 minutes.
Yep.
And I'm really appreciative of that too. Like it doesn't waste your time at all. It just gives you enough to get going and also gives you just enough explanation to continue the ride that we're on. And I think that's got to be a commentary because there's so many. I don't know about you, David, how you feel about it, but there's so many, especially films from Disney, that I feel just not just over-explain things, but really dumb down and treat the audience like children, and they don't trust them to don't trust them with what they're presented.
Basically. Yeah, basically. like modern movies, yeah, there's a trend of modern movies being filled with a lot of fluff to
Mm.
try and explain or show or just generally give more exposition. And it's like a lot of that isn't really needed.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because like the over processed scripts that are come out of these films, like the rewrites that are done multiple times, the multiple drafts that are done from one writer to the next that a project's trying to just get the ground off of. I don't think it's necessarily something
I
like
would,
that, but it's something. I think that's part of it. But I
I
also
think,
think the main part, and then I'll let you go on. But I think the main part is they'll do it. They'll make the movie and then they'll test it and then they'll redo a ton of stuff just to get audience perspective on it.
yeah, I think what it is it's movies made by committee, you
Yeah.
know? Um, it's all this, like, you have to have all this input from, studio executives, from all the various writers and producers and whatnot that are attached to the project, and they all have to add their little thing into it. Then you have to have it has to perform well with test audiences and all that. Basically, it's like they've got this, like, all these metrics of quality that they have to meet in order to make the movie, but meeting all these metrics doesn't make a good movie.
Yeah. And it's also kind of also dilutes the original creator's vision, which could be good or bad, but most of the time we've seen it used to the detriment of a film. I mean, I think of this is not a specific example to what I just said, but I think of stuff like Alien Romulus, the Fede Alvarez film that came out, where it's, kind of a more back to basics for the Alien franchise. And one thing I love about that is it does a good job establishing its own kind of feel and mood while also calling back to the originals. I think, in my personal opinion, Alien Romulus, and you know a lot of the spoilers about that film. You and me were talking about it, but that has almost nearly way too many callbacks, I feel like, for the Alien franchise. Like, oh, you remember this line, right? Oh, hey, you know this character, right? Well, he's back. It's like, okay, yeah, I get you. It's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but it's not respecting the audience, I think, in a way. I feel like that film does it, but just enough where it's nearly overbearing. It's still an enjoyable film, but it is overbearing to a certain extent.
Yeah, and that's part of it too, is like, there's no movies nowadays, like, directors and studios nowadays are not confident about their films as they are. So they have to make sure to add in all this stuff that can connect with people who are nostalgic about whatever intellectual property this film is based off of.
Yeah.
Because basically, if they took all that stuff away, in a lot of cases, I mean, I haven't seen Alien Romulus, so I can't comment on that particularly, but in a lot of cases, a lot of movies that are new entries in existing IPs, if they took away all the references and all the callbacks and stuff, these movies would not stand on their own.
No, and it's I think that's a great point, because if you go back to Alien Romulus, it's not a good there's so many callbacks to the franchise before that it kind of loses its self-identity in that, from what I've seen when watching the film, which I do want to watch with you eventually. It's pretty dang good, but it does have some more over reliance, I should say, on callbacks. But I think it's just part of the era we're in, where everything costs so, especially in production of movies and stuff, they put so much money into all this that everybody that's putting in that money kind of wants a say in the project, whether it be in a new Avengers film or the Minecraft movie that's coming out,
God.
Like it's just frustrating to me, because it's like, I look at a more simpler time that this came out in, or at least a more perceived simpler time, and the movie industry was just in a different spot. Like when Fly the Navigator came out, like yeah, Disney was in the dark ages, but you had some pretty interesting films coming out in the 80s, and the big blockbusters were just rolling in when Spielberg and Scorsese, of course, doing his thing throughout the 80s. And
then, of course, you have George Lucas.
yep, we have Star Wars throughout
Yeah.
the early 80s, and then Indiana Jones after that, So,
Yeah.
like, there's some great stuff that came out of the 80s and some fantastic stuff that came out of the 90s. But I feel like nowadays, I hear a lot of pundits and people I listen to in Hollywood and in the video game industry as well talk about they need to get down to lower budgets. They have to, and it's going to be harder to make something of a lower budget, but the return will be better. Like, this movie only cost $9 million in 1985 and 6, and it made only $18 million. Like, that's not a great recovery at all. But it probably murdered and killed video in the video and cassette sales and rentals. I can absolutely guarantee this film made a lot of its money back that way.
Yeah.
And made a good profit too. But we don't have that nowadays. We don't have that necessarily that same industry. We have streaming now, which is kind of throwing a huge wrench into this whole discussion.
Yeah, that it used to be that studios would take risks on more original films.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they were still part of an existing IP, or they were based on an existing IP, but the director at least took some risks in trying to craft a movie that had its own identity at the very least. And studios basically, because the amount of money that they were putting into these movies wasn't as much as they are now.
Yeah.
And
they were able to take those risks.
They were able to take those risks also because they weren't hoping on the, opening weekend at the theaters being their only return on investment.
Yeah.
They were, they were like, okay, if this bombs at the theaters, we still have a second chance in the home video market. And the home video market is kind of today.
Yeah, I mean, you have digital rentals, but that's pretty much all you have. Really.
Most of it is streaming.
And I see people talk about in the film industry, like in Hollywood in general, like, oh, how do we make money back on what we've done? Well, the streaming has kind of just destroyed that second market. So how do you take more risks? How do you do that? And I feel like the answer is not here yet, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe it will be one day. But
I mean, I don't think the answer is going to come from the existing Hollywood system. That's for sure. There's going to have to be some innovation that happens, and Hollywood is not going to be the one to do it because they already don't want to take risks.
Yeah.
They don't have the home video market as a sort of a second chance for movies to make money anymore. And budgets are skyrocketing.
Oh man.
Even when it doesn't even make any sense for budgets to be skyrocketing.
Yeah, like more recent news, like the Red One movie came out, the Santa Claus movie with Dwayne Johnson in it.
Oh yeah.
J.K. Simmons as Santa and Chris Evans in it. Like, that movie's a like Hollywood star powerhouse, but Hollywood stars don't sell movies anymore. That's kind of, and they spent $250 million on that movie. I bet most of it went to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but I mean,
oh yeah,
and the CGI. But like, come on, y'all, like $250 million? That's just crazy. Like, it's unnecessarily huge and bloated. And I'm sure there's way better ways to manage your money with that. It seems like, I don't know, it seems like laziness is a big part of it to me from being an observer of the industry and being outside of it. But also, like, you have to cater to a lot of folks, and this might be the way of doing it, is to give them better checks and better catering, all this kind of crazy stuff with the crazy budgets going on. So
yeah,
I'm sure that's a factor. I don't think that's all of it, but
I think part of it too is, I think, because you see all these like with the recent election, basically you had all these celebrities whose endorsement was, let's say, more or less bought. I mean, obviously it's, you can't prove that in a real cut and dried sense that it was bought,
Yeah.
But you look at the circumstances, and there was, there was some money that changed hands for all these, and the expectation was that all these celebrities were going to convince people to vote for one side because people respect celebrities. People look up to celebrities. And it's the same thing that happened in 2020 with COVID.
Yeah.
All these celebrities is like, take the shot, wear the mask, do it to save grandma.
Yep.
And I think what's happened is a lot of these big name stars have gotten kind of, as a result of that, have gotten kind of an inflated sense of self-worth. So when you have big name people like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, they, they're not going to do a movie unless they get a big payday out of it, because they think they're like, all that in a bag of chips. But when you think about it, I mean, what does Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson really bring to a movie other than just, being
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
Yeah, he's not that great of an actor.
Yeah.
He basically plays himself in every movie. And
what's that meme where it shows 4 different screenshots from 4 different films? Like 2 of them are from the Jumanji movies, one's from the Rampage film, and then there's another film thrown in there, and it's Dwayne Johnson dressed in the same like tan shirt in each movie. And it's like, believe it or not, but these are 4 different screenshots from 4 different films.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, that's
yeah. Another example too that I can think of I think celebrities becoming, high on their own supply, shall we say. Tried to make sure I used a less colorful metaphor than I was originally going to.
Okay. I have another one to follow up when you're done there.
Is Robert De Niro.
Oh yeah.
Like, remember his speech in front of in New York, like for I think it was. I mean, it was definitely against Trump, but was it for Biden specifically?
Probably. I don't remember actually.
But either way, he was given a speech, and he was expecting that people, were gonna take him seriously.
Yeah.
And they were gonna appreciate him, and they did not. And well, he got mad about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the time of the celebrity selling a film is like officially over, I would say.
Yeah.
And whether they sell whatever they sell, that's also over. I think I saw Ernie Hudson, who was in Ghostbusters, right? He's 78. He looks fantastic. And so they took advantage of his looks and his like recent appearance in the latest Ghostbusters movie, and Pfizer hired him to sell their new like medicine or pharmaceutical drug and stuff.
Oh my God.
And he's like, look at me, I'm Ernie Hudson and Pfizer's cool. And here's the latest vaccine or something. It's like, dude, this is ridiculous. Like you're taking this guy who obviously has kept really good health and has done really good for himself. He's 78, looks fantastic at 78. Black don't crack. That's just how it be. And they took that and are using it to like manipulate like their view of their company,
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And it's really funny to me that some executive at Pfizer is like, who the people really respect and look up to? Ernie Hudson.
He's relevant nowadays.
Oh my God.
He's like, he could serve a purpose and he could serve us in that way. And it's like, that's smart marketing, but it's like,
it's clearly transparent.
Yeah.
It's a ploy. It's manipulation.
Yeah.
It's not that people see right through that. They see Ernie Hudson telling them that Pfizer's awesome. They're not like, maybe he's right. No, they see right through it.
Yeah, exactly. And the veil has lifted. The times have shifted. And speaking of shifted, let's shift back to Fly the Navigator.
Indeed.
So they get, let's see what happens next. So he's controlling the ship. He's like, we need to play some music. And so through a various amount of back and forth between them driving the ship and the parents talking to Sarah Jessica Parker, and she's telling them everything that's happening, that's really happening behind the scenes right now and where David's at. And so she goes and spills the beans to them. NASA then follows her there and holds basically the family hostage. At the same time, David and Max are just flying everywhere across America. It's like soaring over the world in Disneyland. That's basically what we're looking at. And Max is like, let me turn on the radio in the Pee Wee Herman voice. And he turns on bossa nova music and he's like, no, this ain't music. And then he turns on some Beach Boys music. He's like, yeah, this is great. And it's, we're going to sing Get Around by the Beach Boys while we fly around. The kids are going to love it. It's great. So that happens. And then they're tracking him down. They find out he's going to head back to Florida. So NASA tracks him. He's going to the south of Texas. The nice guy's like, he's going home. And so then they stop by this gator station called, let's see, what's the name of it? It's called Al's Gator Shack or whatever. But anyway, so they stop there and the guy who's running Al's Gator City is what it's called. And he's just big fella and he's just standing there. And he's like, hey, mister, can I have some change for the phone? I need to make a call. So he does, and he gives him the change and he just stands there and looks at the ship and just stares at it. And then as David's calling his family to let him know what's going on, a family shows up in the family car, and they're stopping at Al's Gator City, the great place in South Texas to be, probably in Georgia most likely, or Louisiana. But anyway,
I'm thinking it's in Florida.
Yeah, maybe.
Because if it's Al's Gator City, it's probably in Florida.
Yeah. So Al is staring, just staring at the ship, and this family's like, "Oh, hey, mister, do you know where we can get some gumbo or something?" I don't know what they said, but anyway, they stop there and they're asking Al, and he just is immobile. He's just looking at the spaceship, and they think it's an attraction. So the kids are like, "Oh wow, look at the spaceship!" As they're looking at the spaceship, cut back to David. He's on the phone. His brother answers it, and he's like, "Yo, David, the feds are here," and he takes the phone into the other room. And basically he's like, you need to make a way for, do you know how to get back home? He's like, do you know that bridge? He's like, no, I don't know anything. I'm 12. And so then he basically tells his brother, can you make a homing beacon or something? Make the house, you need to make it so where I can see the house from the sky. And so he's like, don't worry. And even if I burn the house down, I'll make sure you get back home. That's literally what he says.
Yeah.
And then so anyway, David hops back in the spaceship. Everybody's perplexed. Al's still standing there looking at the spaceship, and they head out. So basically what happens after this is Max is becoming more of a human as we go along because of his 12-year-old persona. And what they also grabbed a map too, and they're trying to find their way home. So they eventually do find their way home. And David, how does the brother get the attention, and what happens when he gets home?
Well, he rummages around in his stash and finds some wonderful fireworks
from 8 years ago, probably
some bottle rockets.
Yeah.
And he brings them up onto the roof and has this whole montage of him desperately trying to light them off, and he either just drops them or they fall over as they're launching off, so they just go into the and then go into the ground or whatever. And then finally he gets some of them lit off, and they go they shoot up into the air. And you see this it cuts to the view of the from the ship. And you see this giant fireworks display that looks like it's happening at Walt Disney World. And we're just, his suspension of disbelief. Somehow a kid with 7 bottle rockets on his house on top of his roof produced a show that looks like, it was a whole
from the world of colors,
like a whole bank of mortars went off,
Yeah, he's shooting bottle rockets, and it's obviously mortars blowing up in the sky. That's what it's awesome. So anyway, he gets back to the house. The family's waiting for him outside, but also NASA's as well. He gets out of the ship. He goes to him. He's like, I don't know if I could stay with you. And so basically David says, is there a way to get back to the past, Max? He's like, yeah, but I don't know if you're going to survive it, pal. You might die. And so David's like, it's worth a shot. So he leaves his family there. He tells them he loves him from far away, gets back into the ship, leaves them in NASA there, and then they head back to 1978.
Well, basically, too, I think it's important to note that this was kind of like a payoff from like an earlier conversation that he had with Max in the movie. So basically, Max says is like, normally I just take every creature I find, every life form I find back to the same time and place in which I found them. But with you, that's not possible because I'm not sure that you would because I can't guarantee that you would have survived the...
Because he's the inferior life form. A human is more delicate than the other species.
Yeah, they're more delicate. So he's like, I couldn't guarantee that you would have actually survived going back in time. So I dropped you off in the present instead, basically.
Yeah, and so Max figures out, okay, let's do this. Let's go back in time. And him and David go back in time. They go basically in the space between spaces, David, from Interstellar, where there's clouds on each end and there's lightning, which is not from Interstellar, come to matter of fact. But anyway, it's time travel. They're going through the space-time continuum, and it's also cutting to clips from Soaring Over California and of clouds, and they're going through it, and we don't know if David's going to make it. And then he wakes up where he was 8 years ago, and there's a train passing by. And so he's like, whoa, am I back? And just like Marty McFly with his tinny runners and blue jeans, he walks through the forest and heads home.
Yep.
And so as he's approaching the house, he's debating. He doesn't know whether this is his time. And then as he's approaching the door, at nighttime, by the way, he then hears his father call off, David, over here. We're already in the boat. And he sees his family. He sees his butt face of a brother there that has a punchable buck tooth face. And he climbs in the boat and they start just celebrating the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And then he has a reconciliation and he says, Mom, I love you. And he says the same to the dad and even the brother. And the brother's like really surprised. He's like, what the hell? What do you love me? I've never heard those words from you in my life. That's not what he says, but it's basically what his reaction was.
That's what his face said.
His face said the words from his face that he didn't speak. And I think from there, the movie just ends.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's like, it's one of those things. The ending was weird too, because I felt like they should have built it up more. Because it's like the whole tension at the end is like, he's just trying to get home to his family.
Yeah.
But like he's realized that these government people are never going to leave him alone. Mm-hmm. Like they're going to study him for the rest of his life, basically. And so he can't live in this time. Like he was prepared to before just deal with the fact that he's like, been frozen in time for 8 years, essentially. And he was prepared to deal with that before, but the reality of the situation is that he won't ever have any kind of a normal existence in this timeline. So he's like, so he gets to this point where he is like, I either, go back to my own time or I die trying. And like it explains what the stakes are, and like I mentioned before, it's like it explains it earlier in the movie that the whole reason he didn't get sent back to his original time as planned was because he wasn't guaranteed to survive it. So that all this is clearly explained, but my issue is that the tension that should be there in that scene is not it's not really there.
Yeah, it definitely lacks the sort of finality to it, I feel. Like the buildup is, well, there's a finality there, but you're right. I feel like the buildup could have been more.
Yeah, they should have built up the tension more to where you're like on the edge of your seat, like, oh my God, is he going to make it? Is he not going to make it? Mm-hmm. But it's more like the tension that should be there isn't.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the fatal flaw of the ending, which is serviceable otherwise.
And I think serviceable is probably the word to use for many aspects of this film.
Yes.
The kid acting, the ending, the build up to the ending, the CGI.
Yes.
We didn't even talk about the CGI.
Yeah, it was very
It's all right.
it was tastefully used.
Yeah.
Unlike the Langoliers. The
the song in the car?
no,
No?
the Stephen King movie that we talked about.
Oh yeah. I think the film, we were talking about Langoliers, which had really bad CGI apparently. I've never seen it. It was a TV movie, right?
Yeah, it was made for TV Stephen King film.
Okay. The other Stephen King movie that was made for TV that I was talking to you about, I think it was called The Nightwalkers. And that is it's like, I'd recommend people to figure out what this movie is. Go type in Chris Stuckman Hilariosity Nightwalkers or whatever. It's basically a really, really bad horror movie where these people turn into these cat-like creatures and can transmogrify into whatever creature they want. And it's really disturbing and it's really bad. Maybe we should watch it one day, David.
Maybe we'll have to pair. We'll do two really awful two made for TV Stephen King films. We'll do that, and then we'll do the Langoliers.
That rolls right off the tongue.
Technically, the Langoliers was a mini series, but it's about the length of a movie. Speaking
of miniseries, how would you feel, David, about watching Leprechauns from the miniseries Leprechauns that has Randy Quaid in it?
I don't know. I haven't really heard anything about that.
We could do, instead of 2 films, we could do 2 miniseries. We could watch Leprechauns, and we could also watch Dinotopia. Would you be down to watch Dinotopia, David?
Oh, what was Dinotopia?
Dinotopia is about 2 brothers that crash on this island, and it's basically a whole society that still has dinosaurs in it, and they coexist with the dinosaurs. In fact, the dinosaurs are kind of like their horses and cattle and stuff.
Interesting. I've never heard of this. I've heard of Dino City.
I mean, no, Dino City. I don't know what the heck.
You never heard of Dino City?
No, but I heard of Velocipaster.
Yes, I've also heard of that.
What are your final thoughts on The Flight of the Navigator, David? We've said the word serviceable, but is there anything else you want to expand upon as your final words?
I think serviceable is pretty much the word for this movie. So it doesn't get my wholehearted recommendation. But I think, like I said before, if you're interested in watching a family-friendly, cheesy sci-fi movie, then this is worth a watch.
What was that one film? It was one of the very first films to use CGI. It wasn't The Last Starfighter. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that, no.
I would say this is better than that movie. The Last Starfighter really leaves a lot of me wanting more from that film. Very shallow characters, very, very cheesy CGI, but you got to admit, it's the first time they're using it. It's not a bad film at all, but it leaves more to be desired, and that's kind of what I felt with this film. I feel like this is better than that, though, and I feel like it brings everything together well enough to make a very entertaining family night of a movie.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you know,
I'd recommend it.
If you've got young children,
especially kids, I think this was great.
Yeah, if you've got young children, you want to watch a cheesy, really wholesome type cheesy sci-fi movie, then
go for it.
This is a good one for that.
And it's got your girl in it, David. Old horse face herself. Sarah Jessica Parker.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, audience, we thank you for listening to a very long 2 films episode of the Snarp Fangle podcast. We appreciate your time, your ears, your time that you invested in us. And we'll see you next time on Snarp Fangle and Fangle on.
Bye-bye now.